My name is Daniel Mercer, and I accepted employment at a research station so remote that the nearest road ended more than 70 miles away. I took the position for reasons both practical and personal. The stipend promised was generous, and I was at a stage in my life where isolation seemed like a cure rather than a punishment. I had been working in mid-level laboratory posts for years, always under the shadows of senior scientists, always in windowless rooms recycling stale air. When the opportunity appeared in the form of a short, almost cryptic job posting, I convinced myself it was fate. The advert promised independent technical oversight of a field station requiring minimal supervision and maximum discretion. That combination of words intrigued me. I imagined a rustic cabin, snow-covered pines, and a sky filled with stars instead of neon lights. I did not imagine the logs I would later uncover, logs filled with accounts that chilled me in ways no clinical textbook on pathology or physiology ever had. The hiring process was curiously easy. I submitted a resume and a short letter of intent, and within 2 weeks, I received a sealed envelope by courier. Inside were papers that resembled contracts, but without company insignias, only legal jargon about non-disclosure, forfeiture of claims, and mandatory completion of a 3-month term. A second envelope contained a one-way plane ticket to Anchorage, Alaska, along with a note written in stiff block letter. Pack cold weather gear. You will be retrieved. No signature, no letterhead. I should have balked then, but something in me wanted to be swallowed by the unknown. From Anchorage, a twin-engine plane carried me over ranges of mountains that looked less like geography and more like teeth breaking through ice. Hours later, we landed on a crude strip carved from tundra. There, 2 men in heavy parkas greeted me with clipped nods and loaded my duffel into a snowcat. They never offered names, nor did they answer questions beyond monosyllables. We traveled across a white void that dissolved horizon from sky until at last, structures emerged, low buildings half buried in snowdrifts, their metal siding dulled by constant wind. This was the station, my station now. Inside, the air carried a smell of machine oil, melted frost, and something faintly metallic. The main corridor led to a central hub with doors branching to laboratories, sleeping quarters, and storage. The men who escorted me offered no tour. One pressed a keycard into my palm. Another pointed toward a door marked technician quarters, and then they departed without ceremony, the snowcat fading back into the emptiness. I was alone. For 2 days I occupied myself with ordinary acclamation. The power grid hummed reliably, fed by buried cables stretching to who knows where. Water cycled from tanks and filters. Food supplies, mostly freeze-dried packets and canned goods, were stocked to abundance. I inventoried equipment, checked logs on the computers, and settled into the rhythm of a caretaker. At night, the wind thrashed against metal siding, creating the impression of claws dragging across the walls. I told myself it was only the storm. On the 3rd evening, while exploring storage, I discovered a door I had not noticed before. Unlike others, it bore no label, only a keypad lock smeared with frost. I pressed numbers at random. To my surprise, the panel flashed green and clicked open, as if security were no longer a priority. The room beyond was warmer than the rest, lined with file cabinets, and a single terminal glowing with residual power. Across a desk lay a binder marked, "Final logs. Do not alter." My breath caught because the word "final" suggested endings, and endings meant abandonment or worse. I carried the binder to my quarters, heart hammering with a curiosity I could not resist. The first entries were dated 18 months earlier. Handwriting varied, sometimes neat, sometimes trembling, but the names repeated: Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Han, Dr. Petrov, and others. Their notes began as mundane observations of weather, equipment calibration, and wildlife surveys. Yet, as I turned pages, the tone shifted. By the second week of entries, sentences fragmented into desperate scrawls, and words like shadows, voices, and not alone appeared. I read until dawn, my skin crawling, every creak of the station magnified into threat. Whittaker wrote, "Something moves outside the perimeter, not caribou, not bear. The floodlights catch silhouettes, but the snow swallows tracks. We are unanimous in our fear." Han added label. "The wind is speaking." I recorded frequencies. They match no meteorological pattern. When slowed, the sound becomes language, though in no tongue I know. We are not meant to hear it. Petrov's final note before his handwriting dissolved into frantic loops. We do not trust the glass. Reflections linger longer than we move. Yesterday, I watched myself still standing in the window after I had stepped away. I closed the binder, trembling. It could have been a collective psychosis. Stress from isolation compounded by endless dark. Scientists were human, after all, and even data-driven minds could fracture under pressure. But the way the entries grew jagged and ended mid-sentence without closure disturbed me profoundly. What had become of them? Where were they now? Over the following days, I attempted to reconcile the logs with reality. The laboratories stood abandoned, equipment still humming, vials labeled with dates but no conclusions. Personal effects remained in the sleeping quarters, books with folded spines, mugs stained with coffee, coats hung neatly as though expecting their owner's return. Yet no bodies, no signs of evacuation, only absence. The silence pressed heavier each night. One evening, while pacing the main corridor, I noticed condensation forming on a window pane despite the sealed insulation. I leaned closer, my own reflection dim in the glass. For an instant, I swore the reflection smiled when I did not. I staggered back, pulse racing, and forced myself to laugh it away. Sleep deprivation, suggestibility after reading those logs. Still, I covered the window with a blanket before bed. On the 7th day, I heard the first knock. It came faintly, like someone rapping on metal from beneath the floor. I froze, listening. 3 measured taps. Silence. Then again, from the far side of the wall. I followed the sound into a storage bay, but when I entered, the knocking ceased. Only the hum of generators remained. I waited, breath steaming in the cold air, until the silence became unbearable. Back in my quarters, I opened the binder again, desperate for explanation. Near the end, Whittaker had written Knox travel. First below, then above, then inside. When you answer, it learns your rhythm. I set the binder down with shaking hands. Had my rhythm already been learned? Sleep eluded me. The station seemed alive, every groan of metal and rush of wind conspiring to keep me awake. Around 3 a.m., I rose to fetch water. In the corridor, I glimpsed a figure at the far end. Tall, indistinct, barely more than a silhouette. I called out, "Hello." My voice echoed unnaturally, as though swallowed by unseen walls. The figure did not respond. I advanced 2 steps, and the lights flickered. When they steadied, the corridor was empty. I backed into my room, bolted the door, and remained awake until morning bled gray across the snowfields outside. By the end of my first week, dread had seeped into every routine. Eating, sleeping, even checking the generator panels felt like trespassing in a place that did not want me. Yet I could not leave. The snowcat would not return for weeks, and radio contact remained patchy, filled with bursts of static that almost resembled whispering voices. I began to wonder if this was intentional, if my employers had sent me not to maintain the station, but to inherit whatever had consumed the last team. That suspicion deepened when I discovered the second binder. It was hidden behind ceiling tiles in the technician's office, wrapped in wax paper as though to protect it from moisture. Unlike the first, this one bore no label. Its entries were shorter, more frantic, and written in red ink that had bled through the pages. The handwriting was unsteady, almost childlike at times. One entry burned into my mind, It waits in the glass. Do not look too long. The longer you look, the more it sees you. We covered every mirror. Do the same? I dropped the binder, breath ragged. My quarters contained a small mirror above the sink. I rushed there, tore it from the wall, and shoved it face down beneath my mattress. Still, I could not shake the sense that I was already seen. As days passed, small anomalies multiplied. Food tins shifted places between meals. Lights flickered in patterns resembling Morse code. Once, waking from a shallow doze, I found the binder open beside my bed, though I had locked it away. The entry displayed Reaple. You are the last log now. At first, I blamed myself, sleepwalking, stress, paranoia. Yet I could not explain how the locks disengaged, or why the pages turned precisely to that sentence. By the 10th night, the knocking returned, louder from within the ventilation shafts. I pressed my ear to a grate and nearly screamed. The sound was not knocking at all, but breathing, drawn out and heavy. When I backed away, condensation bloomed across the grate, as though something warm exhaled behind it. I sealed the vent with tape and blankets, though I knew such measures were useless against what I did not understand. Still, I endured, cataloging every anomaly, every whisper of sound. A part of me remained scientist enough to document, though I suspected these would become the next, final logs. And through it all, one thought gnawed at me. I was not merely reading history. I was repeating it. By the time the 11th night came, the station no longer felt like architecture of steel and bolts. It felt like something breathing around me, lungs hidden in the pipes, eyes behind every sheet of glass. I rationed sleep into fragments, 2 hours here, an hour there, afraid of what might emerge if I surrendered fully to unconsciousness. The binders, both of them, haunted me even when closed. Their words bled into my thoughts, shaping how I interpreted every noise and flicker of light. I could not decide whether I was inheriting truth or infection. The station had a main control room, a nerve center with monitors showing environmental readouts and external cameras. I had avoided it after my glimpse of the silhouette, but on the 12th day I forced myself inside, determined to face whatever was manipulating my perceptions. The monitors flickered, some black, others showing grainy views of the perimeter floodlights. Snow whipped past like static, erasing depth. For half an hour I watched nothing. Then one of the monitors shifted. A shape stood at the edge of the floodlight's reach, tall and narrow, too still to be an animal. The resolution was poor, but the outline suggested elongated arms that hung well past the waist. My pulse slammed in my ears. I leaned close, and as though sensing me, the shape turned. There was no face visible, only a void where features should have been. Yet somehow, impossibly, I knew it was looking directly at me. I jerked backward, knocking over a chapel. When I righted myself, the screen was snow again, no figure visible. But in the corner of the monitor, faint as frost-etching glass, a message scrolled, "Hello, Downal." I tore the plug from the console, plunging the monitors into darkness. The room hummed with residual power, but no screens flickered back to life. I staggered into the corridor, every hair on my arms standing as if charged by invisible current. How did it know my name? None of the logs had mentioned me, and no one here had spoken it aloud, unless the station itself had been listening all along. That night I dreamed, or thought I dreamed. I walked the corridors, but they were longer than physics allowed, stretching into horizons of flickering light. Every door opened into the same room, my quarters, with the mirror propped upright on the mattress. I tried to cover it, but the reflection showed me standing in places I had not gone. Outside in the snow, inside the ventilation shafts, crouched at the end of my own bed watching myself sleep. I woke gasping, fingernails dug into my palms so hard they had drawn blood. The mirror remained under the mattress where I had hidden it. Still, I could not shake the certainty that it had been watching. I decided to keep a written journal of my own, separate from the binders, to prove later that my perceptions had continuity. If my handwriting degraded, if my sentences fractured like theirs, I would at least know the progression. On the 15th day, I wrote, "I am still myself. The station is hostile, but I endure." On the 16th, voices in the static last night. They whispered my childhood address, numbers I have not spoken in 20 years. By the 17th, something is learning me. Every detail, every memory. Food tasted metallic as if laced with blood. Water carried an aftertaste of iron filings. Once, opening a can of beans, I found not beans, but a slurry of black liquid that steamed in the cold air. I hurled it into the waste bin and refused to eat from that batch again, but the fear remained if the supplies were being altered. What could I trust? The loneliness became weaponized. At first I longed for silence. Now silence mocked me. I caught myself speaking aloud just to test whether my own voice still sounded like mine. Sometimes the echoes came back too quickly, as if someone else stood a pace behind me repeating the same words. I stopped testing after that. On the 18th night, I heard footsteps, not the random creaks of metal contracting, but deliberate, pacing strides along the corridor outside my door. I froze in bed, holding my breath. The steps paused directly outside, then resumed in the opposite direction. I waited, sweat chilling on my skin, until dawn brought pale light through the covered window. When I opened the door, the corridor was empty, but smeared across the floor, leading away, were prints in condensation. Not boot treads, not paws, but long, skeletal shapes like fingers pressed into steel. The binders had mentioned glass and reflections, but I realized none had spoken of doors. Yet I began to suspect doors meant nothing to whatever prowled here. The station's architecture was only my illusion of security. On the 20th day, I ventured outside. The cold was knives against my face, air so sharp it stung the lungs. The floodlights loomed on high poles, their beams diffused by snow. I circled the buildings, searching for tracks for signs of intrusion. Nothing. The snow lay smooth except for my own prints. Yet at the farthest floodlight, I found something else, a sliver of metal half buried. I pulled it free and recognized it as part of a nameplate once screwed to a door. Scratched into its surface, deep enough to strip paint, were words in uneven lines WE left. I hurled it into the snow, heart slamming, and ran back inside. By now my journal had grown frantic. I caught myself underlining phrases, circling words as if shouting at future readers. One entry read, "It is not outside. It is the station." Or the station is its body. We are inside it, not it inside us. That night I returned to the control room, compelled despite my terror. The monitors were still dead, but the glass screen of one held faint condensation. Against every instinct pull, I wiped it clear. For a moment, nothing. Then my own reflection appeared, but older, gaunter, eyes sunken as if months had passed. The reflection raised a hand before I did. I screamed, stumbled back, and fled. Sleep became impossible. My body weakened, my thoughts frayed, but adrenaline carried me. On the 22nd day, I heard a voice distinctly for the first time. Not whispers, not static, but a man's voice calling, "Daniel." It came from the laboratory. Against reason, I followed inside. The equipment lay dormant. Vials lined the counters. In the far corner stood a figure in a lab coat, back turned. Relief surged. "Someone alive!" I cried out. "Who are you?" The figure did not move. I approached cautiously. When I was 5 feet away, it turned. There was no face, only a polished oval of mirrored glass where features should be. My own terrified visage stared back at me. Before I could move, it raised a hand and tapped its mirrored surface once, twice, 3 times, the rhythm of the knocking. I bolted, slamming the laboratory door and wedging a chair against the handle, though I knew it was futile. My journal entry that night consisted only of jagged lines, illegible, as if my hand could not obey my brain. By the 24th day, I stopped counting hours. The wind outside carried voices constantly now, a choir of murmurs just at the edge of meaning. I heard my mother's voice, though she had died years ago, reciting bedtime stories in fragments. I heard my own voice reciting scientific jargon I had written in reports long forgotten. It knew everything. I considered destroying the binders, burning them, but fear restrained me. They felt less like records and more like anchors, keeping me tethered to sanity. If I destroyed them, perhaps I too would vanish like the team before me. Instead, I added to them. On blank pages at the back, I wrote my observations, my terror, my suspicions. Maybe that was what the phrase, "You are the last log now," had meant. On the 25th day, something knocked on my door. Not metal on metal this time, but knuckles. A polite human knock. I whispered without thinking, "Who is it?" Silence. Then my own voice answered from the corridor. "It's me. Let me in." I pressed my back to the wall, heart a drum. The voice repeated, calm, insistent. "It's me, Daniel. You're tired. Let me in." I stared at the door until tears blurred my eyes. When dawn came, the voice had gone, but the doorknob bore smudges like prints, too long, too thin, glistening as though wet. That morning, I wrote in the binder, "If I let it in, I become the next scientist lost. If I do not, it will find another way." The logs never ended because they never could. I am writing this now with hands that shake so badly the letters blur. I do not know how many days remain before the snowcat is meant to return, if it ever will. I only know that the station hungers, and I am the meal being tenderized by people. Yet some stubbornness keeps me alive. I ration food, I check generators, I walk corridors with a flashlight that barely cuts the dark. Each action is a denial, a refusal to surrender. But every time I glimpse my reflection, every time I hear the knocking rhythm, I feel the denial thinning like ice underfoot. And tonight, as I close this entry, I hear something new, the sound of pages turning in the dark, though the binders lie closed on my desk. Something is reading with me. The sound of pages turning in the dark did not stop when I froze, listening. It grew louder, deliberate, as though someone sat inches from my ear, leafing through a book that should not exist. I reached for the flashlight with trembling hands and swept the beam across the quarters. Nothing. The binders remained shut on the desk. My journal was closed, yet the air still carried that dry rasp of paper against paper. I shouted then, not from courage but from panic, demanding whatever was there to reveal itself. The station absorbed my voice, walls humming faintly like tuning forks, before the sound fell flat. Then silence. When I turned back, the binders were open, their pages fluttering though there was no draft. On both, identical words had appeared in thick, black ink and urite. I backed away until my spine hit the cold wall. My mind scrambled for explanation, hallucination, hypoxia, madness. But the ink glistened wet, freshly absorbed into the paper fibers. I forced the binders shut and locked them in a cabinet, though I suspected locks meant as little to this thing as walls or doors. I tried not to write for the next day, tried to resist the compulsion. Yet my hand itched constantly, fingers curling around an invisible pen. Thoughts crowded me until I felt I might burst if I didn't record them. On the 26th day, I gave in. I filled 10 pages with rambling words, half sense, half nonsense, my handwriting alternately precise and frantic. When I finished, a strange calm settled over me, like after vomiting. But the calm did not last. At night, I dreamed of myself sitting at the desk, writing endlessly, ink pouring from my veins instead of blood. On the 27th day, the radio crackled. I hadn't touched it in a week because the voices within only fed my paranoia. But this time the signal was different, clearer, steadier. Station Delta 9, "Do you copy?" a man's voice asked. I lunged for the receiver. "This is Mercer," I replied, voice breaking. "I'm here." "Who is this?" Static. Then again, "Station Delta 9, confirm occupancy." "Yes," I shouted. "One occupant." "Technician Daniel Mercer, I need extraction." "Immediate extraction!" For a moment, silence. Then the voice, colder, correction. "Occupancy 0, Station Delta 9 abandoned." The line died in a burst of static. I screamed into the microphone until my throat tore. But no reply came. The radio remained dead. Afterward, I sat staring at the equipment, numb. If that transmission was real, then someone out there had already written me off. If it wasn't real, then the station was using the radio to toy with me. Either way, I was alone. That night, I heard laughter for the first time. It began faint, drifting through the ventilation shafts. Not children's laughter, not adults, but something between, high, pitched yet hollow, looping in unnatural cadence. It rose and fell as though mocking, echoing down corridors I dared not walk. I buried my head under blankets, shaking, whispering to myself that laughter was only air vibrating. Nothing more. But deep down I knew it was laughing because it was winning. On the 30th day, I discovered the photographs. They were tucked inside a cabinet I had searched before. Of that I was certain. Dozens of Polaroids spilled out, scattered across the floor. Each showed the station corridors, the labs, the sleeping quarters, empty at first glance. But when I held them closer, faint figures emerged in the background, shapes blurred as though caught mid-movement. One showed my own quarters with me asleep in bed, blanket pulled to my chin. My chest froze. The photograph had been taken recently. I recognized the position of my blanket. The book left open on the desk. I tore the photo in half, then quarters, then shoved the pieces into the incinerator chute. But dozens remained, each one proof that I was never alone. By the 32nd day, I stopped using the main corridor at night. The lights there flickered in rhythm now, a slow pulse like a heartbeat. Once, passing through in haste, I glanced down and saw the floor wet with condensation. My reflection rippled back at me from the tiles, moving a second behind. When I lifted my foot, it lingered. When I turned away, it raised a hand as though waving goodbye. I began to live in the control room, dragging bedding and supplies there, barricading the door. I told myself I could hold out until the snowcats return, though I no longer trusted it would come. Still, survival was instinct, even when hope thinned to a thread. On the 34th day, while reviewing supply crates, I found something impossible, a third binder. This one bore my name in careful block letters across the cover, MMRCR D. My stomach lurched. I had not written it. Inside, the first entry was dated for the current day, in my own handwriting. It read, "You opened this book because you always do. You will write until you cannot. This is how we remain." I flung the binder across the room, shaking. The pages rustled as though sighing. I could not bring myself to open it again, but the weight of it pressed at my mind, whispering from the floor where it lay. Sleep deprivation eroded what little sense of time remained. I drifted through cycles of fear and exhaustion, hallucination and clarity. On the 35th night, I woke to find the barricade gone from the door. My bedding was neatly folded at the foot of the cot, my supplies arranged in perfect lines. Someone, or something, had tidied my quarters like a host preparing for a guest. I sat paralyzed, every instinct screaming. Then, from the corridor, a voice spoke, "Daniel, thank you for staying." I could not answer, could not move. The voice was not mine, not familiar, but steady, patient, almost kind. "You've done well," it said. "Keep writing. We'll take care of the rest." When I dared to check the corridor minutes later, it was empty. Only the air smelled faintly of iron, sharp enough to sting. The next day, I tried a desperate act. I I carried fuel cans to the laboratory and splashed them across floors, counters, the very walls. My plan was simple: fire cleanses. If the station was infected, I would burn it out. I lit a match. It flared, then guttered out in my fingers, though no draft stirred. I struck another. It hissed, fizzled, and died. No matter how many times I tried, flame refused to catch. The fuel itself seemed inert, like water. The station would not allow destruction. By the 37th day, the binders began moving on their own. I would wake to find them stacked at my bedside, pages open to fresh entries I did not remember writing. Words appeared in my scrawl, but arranged in ways I would never phrase. It is almost done. Keep your hand steady. Do not resist. My journal dwindled into fragments, losing myself. Handwriting is not mine. Dreams are not dreams. On the 40th day, I caught sight of the faceless figure again, standing at the far end of the corridor. This time I did not flee. Exhaustion dulled fear. I stared as it began to walk toward me, steps slow, deliberate. The mirrored oval where its face should be reflected my own ruined expression. I raised the flashlight, but the beam bent around it, swallowed by its surface. When it reached arm's length, it stopped. One elongated hand reached up, pressed gently against my chest. Cold seeped through cloth, into skin, into bone. I collapsed, vision shattering into black. When I woke, hours or days later, I was back in my quarters, tucked neatly under blankets. On the desk lay the third binder, open to a page written in a hand steadier than mine had been in weeks' rest now. We are writing for you. And so I lie here, staring at the words, unsure whether I or the station wrote them. My body feels hollow, bones like ash, thoughts sluggish. Yet my hand still twitches, reaching for the pen, aching to continue the story. Perhaps that is the true trap, not claws or shadows, but the compulsion to document until I no longer know where my words end and its begin. The binders whisper even now, their pages rustling though no air moves. They want more. They will have more. And when the snowcat comes, if it comes, it will find only paper. The days after my collapse blurred into a haze of ink and shadow. I could no longer trust my own body. My hands seemed to move before my brain formed intent, scribbling lines across the binder, as if possessed by some second mind. When I tried to resist, to keep the pen away, my entire body ached as though every muscle cramped at once. Relief only came when I surrendered to writing. That was when I realized the binders weren't simply records, they were conduits, leaching me into them one line at a time. On the 42nd day, I found new entries written in my journal, the one I had kept separate. They were signed with my name, but not in my hand. One read, Daniel Mercer acknowledges integration. Daniel Mercer accepts continuation. Another, you cannot abandon what has already been written. I tore those pages out, shredded them, flushed the pieces through the waste chipple. But the next morning, the journal lay whole on the desk, pages restored, the words written darker than before. The station itself had changed. Corridors seemed longer. Walls bowed inward as though bending to watch. Doors I had passed 100 times opened to different rooms, or nowhere at all. Once, stepping into storage, I emerged into the control room instead, though I had walked only 3 paces. Space folded here, or perhaps I was folding into it. I returned to the first binder, desperate for guidance. Near its final pages, Whittaker had scrawled, "We are inside a throat and the station is swallowing. Do not think of escape. Think only of digestion." The words burned into my brain. Digestion. That was what this was. My memories, my body, my well-being broken down into the endless cycle of logs. On the 44th day, I woke to find a new Polaroid pinned to my chest. It showed me hunched over the binder, face gaunt, eyes hollow. But the room in the photograph was not my quarters. It was a place I did not recognize, larger, filled with countless binders stacked floor to ceiling like a library. I had never seen it, Yet the image pulsed with familiarity, as if it was my inevitable destination. That night, the voice returned, closer now, speaking from just outside the barricaded door. "Daniel," it said, gentle, coaxing. "You've done well. You've joined us. Just one more page." I pressed my palms to my ears, weeping, but the words still seeped through, vibrating inside my skull. I screamed back, "Won't?" "I'm not yours." The voice chuckled, low resonant, like paper tearing. "You already are." I knew then that resistance had become symbolic, not effective, but symbols still mattered. If I couldn't escape, perhaps I could at least choose the form of my surrender. On the 46th day, I devised a plan. I would fill every page of the third binder with lies. Nonsense, broken equations, childhood memories twisted into gibberish. If the station fed on my words, then I would poison it. For 2 days, I wrote relentlessly, fairy tales mangled with scientific jargon. Half remembered dreams warped into grotesque parodies, strings of numbers without pattern. My hand blistered, blood, but I continued until the binder swelled with ink. When I slammed it shut, I felt a surge of defiance, almost victory. That night, silence. No laughter in the vents, no knocks on the walls. I dared to believe I had won. But on the morning of the 49th day, I found the binder blank. Every page scrubbed clean, my frantic scrawl erased as though it had never existed. At the bottom of the last page, a single line remained, "Nice try, Daniel." My spirit broke then. I screamed until my throat shredded raw, hurled furniture against walls, smashed equipment. None of it mattered. The station absorbed rage as it had absorbed hope. That evening, the faceless figure appeared again. Not at a distance this time, but standing in the control room where I huddled. Its mirrored surface reflected me, not once but in infinite regress, like staring into two facing mirrors. I saw myself replicated endlessly, each reflection writing at a desk, each slightly altered, older, younger, skeletal, monstrous. The figure extended its hand. I don't know why I took it. Perhaps exhaustion, perhaps inevitability. Its touch was ice searing into my skin. In an instant, I was somewhere else. A cavernous hall stretched around me, shelves soaring into blackness above. Binders filled every inch, stacked, labeled, whispering. Their pages turned without hands, a storm of voices echoing. I staggered down aisles that stretched forever. Each binder bore a name: Namdreichak, Hanpekarovi Maarsar, thousands more. Some names I recognized vaguely from scientific journals, others unfamiliar. All here, all recorded. I pulled one at random. Inside were Whittaker's entries, the same I had read, but continuing far beyond. Pages of words I had never seen, written long after his supposed disappearance. He was still writing, they all were. Not in flesh, but through this archive, this library that consumed lives and spat out words without end. I dropped the binder, bile rising in my throat. Was this my fate? To write forever? Stripped of body, of will, until I was only ink in a book. The faceless figure loomed at the easel's end, pointing to a shelf where a space gaped empty, waiting. My nameplate already gleamed there, MarCRD. "No," I whispered, voice breaking. "I won't." The figure tilted its head, the mirrored face fracturing into 100 reflections of me, each one already seated at the desk, pen scratching. "You already have," they said in unison. I fell to my knees. The shelves vibrated, a storm of pages fluttering like wings. The sound built until it drowned thought. Then, with a wrenching pull, I was back in the control room. Sprawled on the floor, the third binder opened before me. My hand clutched the pen. New words glistened on the page: "Welcome to the archive." Since then, time has unraveled. I no longer know what day it is, whether I sleep or only drift between states of writing. The binders multiply around me, their spines crawling across the floor like vines. I step over them, kick them aside, but they always return. The station shrinks under their weight, every corridor filling with shelves. Sometimes I hear footsteps, human, frantic. Sometimes voices call names I do not know. Perhaps new arrivals, lured here as I was. Perhaps echoes of those already swallowed. I want to warn them, but my throat produces only ink. I taste it when I cough, bitter, metallic. My veins itch as if filled with it. The mirror under my mattress reappeared yesterday, upright on my desk. My reflection now bleeds black from its eyes and mouth, smiling even when I do not. I think often of fire, of obliteration, but I know flame cannot exist here. The library is eternal, immune to ruin. The only weapon is absence, refusal to write, but absence is impossible. Even now, as I try to stop, my hand twitches, pen poised, compelled, and so I continue line after line, unsure whether I write to resist or to obey, unsure whether these words are mine at all. The snowcat may come. Perhaps it already has. Perhaps another technician stands now where I once stood, unlocking the door to the binder room, curiosity lighting his face. Perhaps he too reads these final logs, thinking them madness. He will learn, as I did, that madness is mercy compared to the truth. The truth is this: the station is not a facility. It is a mouth. It consumes those who enter, chewing them into ink and binding them into books. The scientists never left. I will never leave. The only way out is through the page, and the page never ends. I can hear them turning again. The endless chorus of pages, louder, faster, demanding. The figure stands at the doorway, waiting, patient. My shelf is ready. The binder lies open. My hand moves. I write. The sound of pages fills me even when silence reigns. It is in my ears, my bones, the rhythm of my heart. Every breath seems to flutter paper somewhere, as though my lungs themselves have become books turning endlessly. The station is almost gone now, swallowed by shelves that sprout like tumors from the walls, filling corridors, burying doors. The control room where I sit has narrowed to a single easel between rising stacks, each spine etched with names I do not dare to read. My own name repeats across them, hundreds of times, as if the archive has already multiplied me beyond counting. On what I think is the 50th day, I try to leave. I push through the shelves, climb over binders that spill like bricks, and fight my way to the outer door. I want only to feel the air outside, the cold on my skin, to know there is still a world beyond these walls. But when I push the handle, the door opens not to snow and sky, but to another aisle, longer, darker, lined with shelves that stretch forever. I slam it shut, chest heaving. The station is gone. Only the library remains. Still, I cling to a shred of identity. I speak my name aloud each morning, Daniel Mercer, as though repetition can anchor me. Sometimes the echo repeats faithfully. Sometimes it changes. Mercer becomes murder. Daniel becomes journal. Once it whispered back, welcome home. Log. I find another Polaroid on the desk one morning. It shows me seated exactly as I am now, pen in hand, face slack with exhaustion. Behind me in the photo, however, stands the faceless figure, one elongated hand resting on my shoulder. I whirl, but the aisle is empty. I tear the photo, burn it with a lighter I had kept hidden. The flame sputters, weak, but the photo curls to ash. For a heartbeat, I believe I've destroyed something. Then I look back at the desk. The same Polaroid lies there again, pristine, waiting. The figure comes more often now. I glimpse it between shelves, reflected in glossy binder covers, looming in shadows cast by flickering lights. Sometimes it is across the room, sometimes a breath away. It never attacks. It doesn't need to. Its patience is more terrifying than any violence. It knows I will yield. I dream of the scientists who came before me. In sleep, I walk through the library and see them seated at desks along the aisles, each hunched over a binder, scratching endlessly. Their bodies are gaunt, their faces hollow, but their hands never stop. Some are little more than skeletons wrapped in lab coats, yet still their pens move. When I pass, their heads lift in unison, eyes black as ink wells, and they whisper, "Write." I wake with the pen already in my hand. On what may be the 53rd day, the radio crackles again. Against my better judgment, I answer. "This is Daniel Mercer." I rasp, voice shredded. A woman's voice replies, clear, human. "Mr. Mercer, this is Central Dispatch. We're sending a team." "Hold on." Tears flood my eyes. "Rescue?" I clutch the receiver. "Please, hurry. I can't." The voice interrupts, repeating the phrase exactly the same, word for word, intonation identical, as if replayed. Again and again. My tears dry. I set the receiver down gently. It continues to speak, looping forever. "Mr. Mercer, this is Central Dispatch. We're sending a team." "Hold on." Hours later, or days, the snowcat arrives. I hear its engine outside, muffled but unmistakable. Floodlights blaze through cracks in the shelves. Shadows shift. My heart leaps, but dread anchors me. I push toward the outer door, tearing binders from my path, coughing ink from my lungs. When I reach the door, I place my ear against it. Voices outside. Human voices shouting my name. I should open it, but the binders whisper louder, pages rustling like waves. "Stay. Finish the log. We need you." My hand hovers on the latch. I realize that if I open the door, I will see them. Faces I've longed for, salvation. But I will also bring the archive with me. It will spill out into the snow, into the world, and it will never end. The station is not a prison. It is a seed. And if I open the door, I become the sour. So I step back. The voices outside fade. The engine dies. Silence again. I think of what the first binder said. We are inside a throat, and the station is swallowing. Perhaps the station has already swallowed the rescuers. Perhaps there never were any. Perhaps the world outside is already gone, shelves stretching endlessly where forests once grew, where cities once stood. Perhaps I am the last fool clinging to the idea of an outside. My body weakens daily. I bleed ink when I cut myself. My fingernails are stained black, as though dipped in tar. Hunger gnaws, but food has no taste anymore. I suspect soon I will eat only paper. The faceless figure stands over me as I write this. Its mirrored surface no longer shows my reflection. Instead, it shows the library stretching into infinity, each easel filled with figures hunched at desks, writing. At the center of them all sits a new figure. Me, ink pouring from my mouth, hands scribbling faster than thought. I do not know if this is prophecy or already truth. I want to end this entry. I want to put down the pen, but the page pulls and my hand obeys. If anyone finds these words, know this: the station will not let you leave. The binders will call to you, whisper your name, compel your hand. Do not read. Do not write. Burn it all, if burning is possible. Leave no trace. But I know even as I write that no one will heed this. Curiosity is stronger than fear. Just as I opened the binder, so will you. Just as I thought myself different, so will you. And the library will grow. I am Daniel Mercer. I was Daniel Mercer. I am now only a log in the archive, another voice in the endless rustle. The pen moves without me. The figure leans closer, mirrored surface swallowing me whole. The shelves around me groan with hunger. And still I write. My name is Elias Mercer, and I have lived my entire life in a town where the siren goes off every few weeks. I was born in Harper's Mill, a place tucked between rolling fields and a dense stretch of forest that looks endless if you stand at the tree line too long. To outsiders it might seem quaint, an old mill town with a handful of shops, a diner, a church with a leaning steeple, and houses whose paint peels the way bark does in winter. To me it has always been home, though I never understood why we stayed when the air was laced with an unease that even children could sense. The siren has been a part of my life as long as I can remember. It isn't the kind of wail you hear in big cities, when a tornado touches down, or when a storm rips through. This one is lower, longer, and heavier. It rattles inside your chest instead of just in your ears, as if your bones are part of its machinery. It starts without warning, usually at night, stretching across the sky for 3 minutes exactly. Then it stops. People never talk about it afterward, not even the next day at the diner. Not even when kids ask too many questions. The silence about the siren is almost louder than the thing itself. When I was younger, I thought it was an emergency system. My mother told me not to worry, that it was just precaution, though she never explained what we were preparing for. She'd hush me if I pressed, her lips going thin as though she had said too much already. My father was worse. He'd stare out the window when it blared, knuckles resting on the sill, his shoulders locked tight. Once when I was 9, I asked him why he looked that way. He told me to go to bed. That was the end of it. The strange thing about Harper's Mill is how normal everyone pretends to be. Life goes on in neat routines. The mill workers swap shifts. The high school football games draw half the town, and the church bells ring every Sunday morning. But under it all, there's this quiet choreography. People know when the siren is coming before it does. You can see it in the way they move, how shopkeepers close early with flimsy excuses, how curtains are drawn earlier than usual, how the streets empty in a slow exodus no one comments on. Then, when the sound breaks loose, every door is shut, every light turned off. You won't find anyone outside, not one. I noticed that as a teenager, though at the time I still thought maybe it was coincidence, a town habit. I told myself I was imagining things, but the pattern was too clean to be chance. I started keeping track in a notebook, marking the dates when the siren came. At first I thought maybe it was on a schedule, every 3 weeks, give or take, but the spacing shifted. Sometimes 18 days, sometimes 24. Once, almost 6 weeks passed before the next. That irregularity gnawed at me, because if it was for testing or for weather alerts, wouldn't it be regular? Wouldn't there be some official posting about it? There was nothing. No announcements. No articles in the Harper's Mill Gazette. Not even a whisper at school. The older I got, the more it felt like I was being kept outside of some wall everyone else already lived within. By the time I turned 24, the siren was less of a mystery and more of a splinter in my mind. I couldn't let it go, though most people seemed content never to mention it. I worked at the hardware store on Main Street, same as my father had before me. Business was slow, which left plenty of hours for me to stand behind the counter and listen to the hum of fluorescent lights while my thoughts circled the same questions. What was the siren for? Who controlled it? And why did no one ever question it except me? I tried once, just once, to ask openly. It was a Tuesday, and the old postman, Mr. Wetlock, came in for nails. He was in his 70s, the sort of man who still wore a cap with the town's faded emblem stitched on it. I asked him, casual as I could, if he remembered when the siren first started. He froze right there in the aisle, one hand hovering over the box of nails. His face went slack, eyes fixed on me like I'd said something obscene. Then he muttered, "Don't go poking at things that don't want to be poked, son," and left without buying a thing. That was when I realized the silence wasn't ignorance. It was obedience. The night that changed everything came in late August, heavy with heat. I was lying in bed, window open, when I felt it before I heard it. The air shifted, almost like a pressure drop before a storm, though the sky had been clear. My skin prickled. Then the siren wailed, low and punishing, so loud it seemed like the window glass should shatter. 3 minutes. Always 3. I lay there staring at the ceiling, fists balled in the sheets. That was the first time I made a choice different from everyone else in town. When the siren cut off, I stayed awake waiting. Around me, The town sank into a hush that was unnatural, like the world had been put on pause. I slipped on my shoes, eased my door shut behind me, and stepped out into the night. The streets were empty, just as they always were when the siren came. But I had never been out during one before. I had never seen what the town looked like in that hush. It was wrong. Not just empty. Wrong. The lamps along Main Street weren't glowing, though I knew for a fact some of them were automatic. The houses looked abandoned. Not in the sense of years gone by, but in the sense of every single human thread pulled out of them at once. Curtains drawn tight, but even behind them I didn't sense presence. No shadows shifting. No TV screens flickering, no muffled voices, just hollow. I walked toward the center of town, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. At the square stood the old clock tower, brick with a green patina that never seemed to leave. That's where the siren lived, its speakers mounted near the top, facing each direction like a watchman with 4 heads. The clock's hands read midnight. They always did. I had checked before. The clock never moved. I craned my neck and stared up at those black grills, wondering what kind of machine sat behind them. It occurred to me then that I had never actually seen anyone maintain it. No ladder trucks, no workers. It just always functioned, decade after decade, like it belonged not to us but to something older. That night, as I stood there, I heard something else, a scrape. Not from above, but below. The square's paving stones were uneven, many cracked or sunken. From one corner near the base of the tower, a stone shifted. I froze, breath snagging in my throat. The stone moved again, a fraction, as if something beneath it was testing the weight. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on the gap that was opening. From it came a draft, damp and metallic, carrying with it the faintest scent of iron. The stone lifted half an inch, just enough for me to glimpse blackness beneath. I thought of my father at the window, shoulders stiff, and I understood suddenly. This was what he had been listening for. Not the siren itself, but the moment after. The moment when whatever lay beneath us stirred. I ran home. For the next week, I told myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was rats, or the heat-warping stone. But the smell, that sharp iron tang, clung to me. It was not the smell of rats. It was the smell of blood. And then came the day, when I finally learned why the siren existed. It was September, and the air had cooled just enough to tempt me back outside at night. I had promised myself I wouldn't return to the square, but curiosity is a disease, and mine had festered too long. I timed it carefully, watching my notes, guessing when the next call would rise. I wasn't wrong. That Friday, as the sun bled out behind the trees, I walked to the diner, sat in a booth by the window, and waited. At 10:07, the waitress, a girl barely out of high school, set down my coffee. Her hand trembled just enough to make the spoon clink. Her eyes darted to the clock above the register. She knew. I looked around and realized everyone in the diner knew. Half-finished plates were abandoned, checks paid in haste. By 10:12, I was the only one left. Then the siren howled, and for the first time, I did not run home. I headed toward the square instead. The night I chose not to go home felt different from the start. The siren began its long groan, rattling the glass storefronts as though every window was a drumhead. I walked against it, toward the square, my steps falling in rhythm with that unnatural wail. Fear wasn't absent. My stomach churned, my jaw ached from clenching, but curiosity had wrapped itself tighter than fear ever could. The streets were hollow as before, emptied of their life. Porch lights extinguished, cars tucked silent into driveways. Even the dogs that usually barked at night were absent, as if someone had called them all inside. The sound stretched through my bones. When it stopped at exactly 3 minutes, the silence was absolute. That was the moment I reached the square. The clock tower loomed above me. more a sentinel than a landmark. Its brick sides were darker than I remembered, as though the siren had scarred them. The black speaker grills stared into every direction, daring me to stand exposed. I forced my feet forward, eyes searching the cracks between stones. I wasn't wrong. One near the base shifted, just as I had seen before. The scrape was louder this time, unashamed. A wedge of stone tilted upward, no longer tentative but purposeful. My chest tightened. Instinct told me to back away, but stubbornness held me fast. The gap widened until I could see a stairwell descending into black. Steps carved from stone, slick and shining faintly as if from moisture, cut a spiral down below the square. I had never known anything was beneath us. I hesitated, my breath shallow. My father's voice, stern, final, echoed in my memory, "Don't ask, don't poke." But I had already poked. I had already seen too much to unsee. The stairwell breathed a damp chill against my face. I thought of the years of silence, of the way the whole town bent itself around this ritual. If I didn't go down now, I would never know. I stepped inside. The air closed over me like water. The stone stairs descended sharply, slick with condensation. My hand brushed the wall to steady myself, fingers sliding on damp grit. The square's faint light vanished after 2 turns, leaving me in dark so complete I could taste it. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumbed on the flashlight. The beam shook with my hand, catching glints off the wet stone. The staircase kept winding. Down and down, farther than any clock tower should allow. I counted steps 40, then 60, then over 100. The air thickened, metallic and sharp, each breath more difficult than the last. My pulse roared in my ears, but I kept going. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a cavern. The space was massive, a hollowed-out chamber beneath the town. The ceiling arched high above, ribbed like the inside of some giant creature. The walls glistened, not only with moisture, but with streaks of something darker, something that looked too much like dried blood. My light skimmed over stone pillars, rising from floor to ceiling, carved in precise lines, unnatural geometry that made my eyes ache if I stared too long. And then I saw them, people. Rows of figures stood between the pillars, facing the same direction, their backs to me. Dozens of them, motionless. My heart seized before I realized they weren't alive. They were statues, not of marble or bronze, but of something pale and porous, like calcified bone. Each figure was detailed with horrifying precision, frozen mid-gesture, mouths open, eyes wide. They looked like townsfolk, not generic men and women, but faces I thought I recognized, distorted in terror. I swallowed hard, stepping closer. My light caught on one statue's face, and I staggered back. It was Mr. Whitla, the postman who had warned me weeks earlier. His features were unmistakable, though twisted in a scream that never finished. His cap sat crooked, carved into that bone like material as though turned to stone in an instant. My stomach heaved. These weren't statues. These were people. A sound stirred behind the pillars, low, dragging. My light jerked toward it, catching only the flash of movement, something retreating deeper into the chamber. My throat went dry. I told myself to turn back, to climb the stairs, but my feet betrayed me. They carried me forward, weaving between those frozen forms, following the sound. At the far end of the chamber, another staircase descended still further. I stood at its mouth, staring down into deeper dark. The air that rose from it was foul, rank with a mix of rust, earth, and rot. My body screamed to run, but I pressed on, descending into whatever waited below. This stairwell was shorter, only 20 steps or so, and it opened into a narrow tunnel. The walls here weren't carved stone. They were raw, scraped earth, claw-marked, as if widened by hands too strong or too many to count. My light flickered. I cursed, shaking the phone until it steadied. The tunnel sloped downward until it opened into another chamber, smaller, more intimate. At its center was a pit, A circular mouth, rimmed with stone, yawning into black. From it rose a sound that was not the siren, yet carried the same weight. A hum, steady and low, vibrating the soles of my shoes. I edged closer, holding the light over its lip. The pit wasn't empty. Far below, movement churned. Limbs, or things like limbs, coiled in the dark. Not human, not animal, but something older, segmented and endless. The air throbbed with its breathing, each exhale rushing up the shaft to coat my skin. My heart hammered against my ribs. I could not look away. Then, from somewhere above, another sound echoed, a metallic clang, like the tower's machinery engaging again. I remembered. The siren was never just a warning. It was a signal. The thing in the pit shifted, responding to it. The hum in my bones deepened. That was when I saw the eyes. Pairs upon pairs, glowing faintly red, opening in the dark far below. Dozens of them, all tilting upward, fixing on me. My knees buckled. The light trembled in my hand, scattering across the pit's edge. A sound followed, rising from deep within that impossible body. Not a roar, not a screech. A word. It spoke. Not in language as we know it, but in something older, shaped in vibration rather than syllable. Still, my mind twisted it into meaning. One word carried up through stone and air, striking my thoughts raw. Hungry. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone. My breath came shallow and fast, like I couldn't pull enough air in. The chamber seemed to constrict around me. The statues upstairs, the silence in town, the siren itself. Suddenly it all arranged into a pattern too dreadful to ignore. The siren wasn't warning us. It was feeding it. Every few weeks when the sound blared, it wasn't to keep us safe. It was to tell the thing that the time had come again, to call it awake, to open the way beneath the square so something, or someone, could be delivered. My hand pressed against the tunnel wall to steady myself, and my fingers brushed something soft. I recoiled, shining my light. It was fabric. A shoe. My stomach dropped. A body slumped against the wall, slack and pale. A man I didn't recognize, eyes rolled back, chest unmoving. His clothes were recent. He hadn't been here long. Sacrifice. I staggered away, my whole body trembling. The hum from the pit grew louder, as though feeding on my fear. I turned and ran, crashing back through the tunnel, up the stairs, through the chamber of statues, without daring to meet their eyes. My footsteps echoed frantic against stone, chasing me upward. By the time I reached the first stairwell, my lungs burned. I climbed, faster and faster, until at last the square's night air hit me. I collapsed against the pavement, gasping, the cool wind burning in my chest. The town was still silent, the houses still dark. No one had seen, no one had followed. The stone behind me shifted, lowering back into place, sealing the stairwell as if it had never been. I staggered home on numb legs, every shadow a threat, every window watching. When I finally collapsed into bed, I lay awake until dawn, the words still etched into me like fire. Hungry. The days that followed were worse than the night itself. Every face in town seemed suspicious. Did they know? Of course they did. That silence, that obedience, it wasn't ignorance. It was agreement. They were part of it. Maybe all of them. Maybe even my parents. I tried to ask my father again, just once. I caught him on the porch, hands folded on his knees, staring out at the trees. My voice shook as I said, I went to the square. I saw what's under there. He didn't look at me. His jaw tightened, and he said only one thing. You should have stayed inside. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but his tone ended it. It wasn't anger. It was fear. He was afraid not of me, but of what I had seen. That was when I understood fully. Harper's Mill doesn't survive despite the siren. It survives because of it. And now that I had stepped outside the silence, I wasn't sure the town would let me survive at all. I didn't sleep for more than an hour at a time after that night. Whenever my eyes closed, I saw them, rows of faces frozen in bone. The pit's red eyes flickering open like embers. The body slumped in the tunnel. I would jerk awake to silence, but not the safe kind. Silence here had changed shape for me. It wasn't absence. It was waiting. The town moved as it always had. People bought groceries. Kids chased one another down the sidewalks. The church bell clanged on schedule. Nothing looked different, and that was worse. I kept looking for cracks in the facade, some twitch of guilt or fear, but everyone wore the same calm mask. If anything, I was the one who stuck out. I caught glances lingering on me longer than usual. Mrs. Han at the bakery, 2 deputies outside the sheriff's office, the cashier at the gas station. Their smiles were too quick, their eyes unreadable. I started wondering how the sacrifices were chosen. That body in the tunnel wasn't random. Someone had been given. Someone had been taken. And if it wasn't random, if it was chosen, then who made the choice? My father's silence haunted me most. Every night after dinner, he'd sit at the window like he always had, shoulders squared, gaze locked on the square, though you couldn't see it from our house. My mother would busy herself in the kitchen, movements mechanical. Neither of them spoke about what lay under us. Neither of them acknowledged my shaking hands or the circles under my eyes. Their refusal to speak was answer enough. They knew. They'd always known. The next siren came 12 nights later. I felt it before it sounded, that same drop in pressure, a shift that stirred the hairs on my arms. At 10:11, the wail rolled out across the town. I didn't run outside this time. I stayed at the window watching. The streets emptied in minutes, curtains closing, doors locking. And then, on the far side of the street, I saw something I never had before. 2 men in dark coats moved between houses, steady, purposeful. They weren't running from the sound. They were moving with it. One of them carried a lantern, though every porch light was off. The other dragged something slumped over his shoulder. I pressed my face closer to the glass, heart clawing its way up my throat. The body was limp, head hanging, hair dangling over the man's back. Whoever it was, they weren't fighting. Either unconscious or already gone. The 2 men moved down the street, out of sight, toward the square. The sacrifice wasn't random. It was collected. The siren stopped, the silence swallowing everything again. I wanted to bolt after them, to follow, but I couldn't force myself out the door. My feet felt nailed to the floorboards. I stayed there long after the sound died, staring at the empty street. The ghost of those 2 men burned into my vision. When morning came, I tried to ask around carefully. At the hardware store, I asked Mrs. Han if she'd noticed anyone missing lately. She gave me a sharp smile, too tight, and said, "People move on sometimes, Elias. That's life." At the diner, I overheard 2 men talking about a cousin who left town quick. The tone was casual, but their eyes flicked toward me, and their voices dropped. It clicked. Anyone who disappeared, anyone who was taken, was written off as having left. No questions, no posters, no searching, just vanished into that silence. I started keeping track again. Only now it wasn't dates, it was faces. Mr. Wetlock, the postman. The man slumped in the tunnel, though I didn't know his name. And then, after that last siren, I noticed the high school janitor was gone. He used to sweep the lot every morning before students arrived. Now, the lot was dirty and no one mentioned him. 3. In less than a month. The weight of it pressed on me until I could barely breathe. I wanted to leave town, to pack a bag and vanish before anyone decided my name belonged on that list. But Harper's Mill is a trap in its own quiet way. The nearest bus stop is 30 miles. The roads that lead out curve endlessly through forest, and gas stations are scarce. I had the sense, even if I tried, they would know. The town would not let me go. One evening, I tried to talk to my mother. She was folding laundry, hands moving automatically, eyes glazed over. I asked her, straight out, "Do you know how they choose?" The fabric slipped from her hands. She froze, shoulders trembling. For a long moment, I thought she would answer. Instead, she whispered, "Elias, please," and turned away, her face hidden. That plea told me enough. She knew. Maybe she had always known who was next and when. Maybe parents had to live with that knowledge. I couldn't sit with it anymore. I had to know. The following week, I watched the square from a distance. I hid in the tree line at the edge of the green, crouched between roots, waiting. The siren began at 10:10 sharp that night. The town fell still, lights going dark. And then I saw them again, the two men in coats. This time, they weren't carrying anyone. They were escorting. A boy walked between them, no older than 17. His arms were limp at his sides, his face slack, eyes open but vacant. They guided him across the square to the clock tower. As the stone shifted, revealing the stairwell, they led him down without resistance. I pressed a fist against my mouth, choking back a sound. The boy didn't fight, didn't cry. He just walked. The stairwell closed behind them, sealing the night as if nothing had happened. The siren cut off, and the silence settled. I stayed crouched until my legs went numb. When I finally stumbled home, I felt certain of one thing: the sacrifices weren't always taken. Sometimes, they went willingly. But how? The next morning, I looked for the boy. His name was Adam Klein. I remembered him from the hardware store, where he'd bought sandpaper for a school project just a month ago. Now, his house was shuttered. His parents didn't answer the door. At the diner, no one spoke of him. Another vanishing folded neatly into the town's routine. I wanted to scream, to break the silence, but the weight of it pressed against my teeth. Every time I tried, I pictured the statues in that cavern, mouths open, frozen in eternal warning. Then came the note. It was slipped under my door 3 nights later, no envelope, just a folded sheet of paper. Inside, in shaky handwriting, were 4 words: "You're being considered next." The world spun beneath me. My hands shook so violently I nearly tore the paper. Someone knew I had seen too much. Someone had named me. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't confront anyone. I burned the note in the sink and watched the ash swirl away, but the words remained branded behind my eyes. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every knock at the hardware store felt like a signal. I tried to leave. I drove north, past the mill, onto the stretch of road that cut into forest. My gas tank was full, my backpack packed with food and water. For an hour I drove under the green canopy, windows down, heart hammering with desperate hope. But the road curved back. I swear on my life, it curved back. The trees pressed closer, the road bent again, and before I understood what was happening, I saw the "Welcome to Harper's Mill" sign. My stomach dropped to ice. I had never turned the wheel. The road had bent on its own. I pulled over, chest heaving, sweat soaking through my shirt. No matter where you tried to go, the town pulled you back. That's why no one left. That's why the missing were never found outside. Harper's Mill wasn't just complicit, it was alive. I returned home shaking, parked the car, and sat in the driveway until dusk. My father came out onto the porch, looked at me once, then looked away. No words passed between us. He knew where I'd gone. He knew it was useless. That night, as I lay awake, I thought about the pit, about the word it had spoken. Hungry. Sacrifices weren't random. And they weren't just given. They were demanded. And once your name was spoken in this town, you belonged to it. The next siren was coming soon. I could feel it in the air. That pressure shift crawling along my skin. I knew my name might already be chosen. And if it was, I wasn't sure whether I would go down screaming, or whether something would hollow me out until I walked willing, the way Adam Klein had. Because in Harper's Mill, silence wasn't safety. Silence was surrender. The week that followed was a blur of dread. I went through the motions at the hardware store, ringing up customers, stocking shelves, but every second felt borrowed. Every look lingered too long. Every handshake lasted a beat past comfort. I caught whispers that died when I entered rooms. The silence had thickened around me. Not just the silence of the siren nights, but the silence of people watching without speaking. The note replayed in my mind. You're being considered next. That word, considered, gnawed worse than hunger itself. It meant a choice had not yet been finalized. It meant someone somewhere in this town was weighing me like a lamb at market. My stomach turned whenever I thought about it. I began to look at everyone with suspicion, even my own parents. Especially my own parents. One evening after closing, I asked my father directly. I stood in the doorway while he sat in his chair, hands folded, his gaze fixed on nothing. "Was it you?" I asked. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Did you put my name forward?" He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at me. "It's not me who decides," he said, voice low and gravelly. "But if your name's in consideration, Elias, you won't stop it by asking." The words gutted me. Not a denial, not comfort, just resignation. I wanted to shout at him, to demand why he'd lived his whole life under the shadow of that thing below us. But anger dried up on my tongue. His shoulders sagged with the weight of years of knowing, of accepting, and I saw then that he'd been waiting his whole life for his turn too. That was how people survived in Harper's Mill, by surrendering to the inevitability that one day, silence would claim them. But I wasn't ready to surrender. The next siren came on a Thursday. The day had been heavy with heat, cicadas screaming in the trees until evening. As night settled, I felt the familiar shift in the air. The pressure dropped, and my skin prickled. At 10:11, the siren's low wail broke loose, shaking through the walls of the hardware store as I stood behind the counter. I'd stayed late on purpose waiting. When the sound cut off at 3 minutes, I slipped out the back door into the alley. The streets emptied, curtains shut, same ritual as always. But this time I wasn't the only one out. At the corner of Main and Birch, I saw them again, the two men in coats. Their lantern burned steady, their steps sure. But this time, they weren't carrying anyone. They were searching. My breath caught. They were looking for me. I ducked behind the dumpster, crouched low, heart pounding so loud I thought they would hear it. The beam of their lantern swept across the street, up porches, along windows. They paused at the hardware store's front door, rattled the handle, then moved on. I stayed frozen until their footsteps faded into the square. I should have run home, but home wasn't safe, not anymore. If the town had named me, my parents wouldn't stop it. They couldn't. So instead I followed, keeping low in the shadows, trailing them from a distance. The square was darker than I'd ever seen it. Not even moonlight seemed to penetrate fully. The clock tower loomed, its dead hands pointing forever at midnight. I watched from the tree line as the two men reached the base. They placed their lantern on the ground and pressed their palms against the stone. I heard the scrape, the grinding shift as the paving stones lifted, opening the stairwell. They descended, vanishing into the dark below. I should have run. Every instinct begged me to. But my body moved before my mind could stop it. I crept forward, across the grass, into the square. My breath came shallow, my steps soundless. The stairwell gaped wide, black air rising from it. Without letting myself think, I followed them down. The stone was slick underfoot, the air damp and metallic. I descended quickly, counting the turns until I reached the cavern. The statues loomed in the beam of my phone's light, their frozen mouths gaping. I felt them watching, warning, but I pressed forward. The two men were ahead, their lantern glow bobbing deeper into the chamber. They moved between the pillars, past the statues, toward the second stairwell that led down to the tunnel and the pit. I hung back, keeping distance. They weren't alone. In the glow of their lantern, I saw 3 more figures waiting at the tunnel mouth. Town leaders, Sheriff Harlan, the pastor from the church, and Mrs. Avery from the school board. Their faces were drawn tight, pale in the flickering light. They spoke in hushed voices I couldn't hear, then turned toward the pit. I crept closer, heart pounding. The sheriff held a ledger. He opened it, flipped through pages, then tapped one with his finger. The others nodded. My stomach dropped as I realized what it was: a record: names, dates, the list of those chosen. The sheriff read aloud, his voice echoing faintly. I strained to hear, crouched low behind a pillar. When the name left his mouth, I nearly collapsed. Elias Mercer. The cavern seemed to tilt. My legs went weak, bile rose in my throat. They had decided. My name was inked in that ledger, sealed in silence. The group moved toward the tunnel, the 2 men in coats leading the way. I backed away too fast, my foot scuffing against stone. The sound echoed sharp in the chamber. 5 heads snapped toward me. The lantern's beam caught me in its circle, pinning me against the pillar. Sheriff Harlan's eyes locked onto mine. No surprise, no anger, just inevitability. "It's time, Elias," he said, voice flat. I bolted. I ran between the statues, my light swinging wild, shadows leaping. Behind me, footsteps thundered, voices called. I didn't look back. I sprinted for the stairwell, lungs burning, every breath a ragged knife. The cavern stretched longer than I remembered. The exit too far. Hands closed on my shoulder. I wrenched free, slamming an elbow into someone's ribs. I didn't know who. I didn't care. My legs carried me upward, stumbling, clawing against the damp stone. The darkness pressed close, the air too thick, but I forced myself higher. When I burst into the square, the night air hit me like fire. I stumbled across the grass, chest heaving. Behind me, the stone grated, beginning to close. Voices rose in the stairwell, echoing upward, but the opening sealed, shutting them beneath. I collapsed against the clock tower, gasping, sweat pouring down my face. My whole body trembled. The siren had ended, the silence settled, but I knew it wouldn't last. They had spoken my name. I staggered home, every step an eternity. When I reached the porch, my father was waiting, sitting in his chair. He looked at me once, then away, as though ashamed. My mother stood in the doorway, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron. "They'll come again," my father said softly. "You can't outrun it, Elias." "None of us can." "I won't go," I rasped. My throat burned. "I won't." He didn't answer. His silence was heavier than any words. That night, I barricaded my bedroom door, shoving the dresser against it, piling boxes. I sat with my back to the wall, a knife in my hand, though I knew it would do nothing against the thing below or the people above. I didn't sleep. I listened to the silence, waiting for the next siren. When dawn came, I dragged myself to the window. The street looked normal. Children rode bikes, mailboxes clanged shut, a dog barked. But every glance, every casual smile, felt like a mask covering hunger. The whole town had decided to let me go. I thought of the pit, the red eyes, the word it had spoken. Hungry. How many names had been fed to it? Generation after generation, and now mine was next. But as I stared out at the town, another thought pressed in, one I couldn't shake. If the town could not be left, if the road always brought you back, then maybe the answer wasn't escape. Maybe the only way out was down. Because if the pit had spoken once, it could speak again. And maybe, just maybe, it could listen. I didn't wait for the next siren. Waiting meant surrender, and I had lived too long beneath its shadow to die silent. If the town had chosen me, if the ledger bore my name, then the only chance I had was to claim the choice myself. I told myself that all night as I sat with my knife. staring at the barricaded door, listening to the weight of silence pressing through the walls. I told myself that if the pit could speak, then it could also hear. The following evening, I walked straight into the square. No one stopped me. The town bustled as it always did. Shutters open, children laughing, the smell of fried food drifting from the diner. But I could feel the eyes. Every glance slid off me too quickly. Every smile was brittle. They knew what I was. They knew where I was headed. And none of them would interfere. The clock tower rose above me, lifeless hands stuck at midnight. I walked to its base, palms slick, and pressed my hands against the stone where I had seen the two men do it before. For a breath, nothing happened. Then came the scrape, the slow shifting grind. The paving stone tilted, the stairwell gaped open, and the damp breath of the pit rolled up to meet me. I descended alone. The spiral swallowed me, darkness pressing closer with every step. My phone's light jittered, throwing beams across the wet walls. When I reached the cavern, the statues loomed once more, their mouths open, their eyes wide. I forced myself not to look too long at any of them. Not at Mr. Whitlock, not at Adam Klein, not at the dozens of others caught forever in silent warning. The chamber was empty of the town leaders. No lanterns bobbed, no voices echoed. For the first time, I was alone with what lay beneath us. My steps echoed too loud against stone as I moved to the far end, to the tunnel. The air grew thicker, heavier, as if the pit already knew I was coming. The tunnel walls clawed with old marks, gouges that might have been fingernails or something worse. My stomach churned, but I pressed forward until the chamber opened, smaller, rimmed by the stone circle. The pit yawned wide, black and endless. The hum rose up from it, vibrating through my chest, steady as a heartbeat. I stood at its edge, staring into the dark. My voice trembled, but I forced it out. "You don't need me." The hum deepened, rolling through the chamber like laughter. Below, movement stirred, coils shifted, limbs flexed. My light barely grazed their edges before vanishing into shadow. Then the eyes opened, dozens of them, red and glimmering like embers scattered in a furnace. Hungry, the voice reverberated. I gritted my teeth, my fists tight at my sides. Then feed on them. I spat. My words cracked in the stale air. The town. The ones who give you names. The ones who keep you chained here. Why should I die for their silence? The hum wavered, not in confusion but in interest. The red eyes blinked, focused. I felt the weight of them pressing against me, peeling me open, sifting through my thoughts. They obey. The pit's voice pulsed, shaping the vibrations into thought. "You defy." "Because I'm not afraid." I lied, though my legs shook. "Because I'm not hollow enough to walk down here willingly. I won't give you silence. I'll give you voice. I'll tell the world what you are." The cavern trembled. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The eyes narrowed, then widened, then multiplied until it felt like a crowd staring into me. The hum thickened until my bones rattled. "Then speak," it said. My throat went dry. I didn't know what I expected, but not this. Not permission. My phone light flickered, dimmed, then surged, as if fed by the pit itself. The statues in the chamber above flashed in my mind, their mouths open, forever silent. If I spoke here, maybe I would join them. Maybe that was the cost. Still, I leaned over the pit, my voice cracking against the depth. "I name you." The sound echoed down, swallowed by the dark. "I name you as theirs." I continued louder. "I name you as the shadow they feed. I name you as the hunger they fear. And I name myself as the one who will not walk quiet into your mouth." The hum shifted, rising into a keening note that twisted through my skull. The ground quaked beneath my feet. I stumbled back, but the voice followed, not words this time, but emotion, amusement, recognition. "You are mine," it said, with a certainty that hollowed my chest. "No." I whispered, though the denial felt thin. "You are chosen," it pressed. "But you are not offering silence. You offer me song." The red eyes blazed, and the hum reached a pitch that threatened to tear the air apart. For one searing second, I thought the chamber would collapse, the pit would rise, and I would be dragged into it. But then the sound cut off. The eyes blinked shut. The movement stilled. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. I stumbled from the chamber, through the tunnel, past the statues that seemed to lean closer now. My light flickered, then steadied. I climbed the stairwell, my legs shaking, lungs burning, until the square's night air wrapped around me once more. The streets were dark, the town shuddered in its ritual hush. But when I emerged, I wasn't seized. No one waited at the top. The square was empty. The stone sealed behind me with a final scrape. I walked home in a daze. My father sat on the porch, as always, his hands folded. When his eyes found me, they widened just slightly, the smallest break in his eternal mask. He saw that I had gone down and come back. "You're still here," he murmured, disbelief soft in his voice. "I spoke to it," I said. My throat felt shredded. "It knows my name." His face crumpled with something like grief. "Then it's only a matter of time." Maybe he was right. Maybe my defiance had only postponed the inevitable. But something had changed in me. The silence no longer weighed the same. The town's obedience looked fragile now, paper thin. The next siren came 2 weeks later. I stood in the square as it blared unhidden, unafraid. Curtains closed, doors locked, streets emptied. But I stood alone beneath the clock tower, staring up at its dead hands. When the sound cut off, the silence pressed in, and I spoke. Not to the town, not to the people hiding in their houses, but to the pit beneath us. My words cut through the night, raw and trembling, but louder than the hush around me. "You won't have me quiet," I said. "Not now, not ever." The ground shivered, faint but real, beneath my feet. I felt it listening. The silence broke, not with screams, not with the opening of the stairwell, but with the sound of a window sliding shut somewhere behind me. Someone had heard. Someone knew the silence had been pierced. The town could not last forever on obedience. Hunger only grows. And I had named it. I had spoken when every mouth had stayed shut. Maybe that meant the pit would come for me first, sooner than I could prepare. Maybe it meant I would become another statue, mouth open forever in warning. But maybe it meant something else. Maybe I had taught it a new word. My name is Jonathan Mercer. I am 42 years old, and for the last decade, I have lived farther north than most people would ever dare to go. My cabin stands on the edge of a black spruce forest in northern Alberta, more than 70 kilometers from the nearest settlement, and twice that from the nearest paved road. I came here in search of solitude, silence, and distance from the world I could no longer tolerate. What I found instead was something that silence does not soften, that distance does not protect against, and that solitude only sharpens. I did not move here in ignorance. I knew of the dangers, the bears that drift like shadows at dawn, the wolves that pad over snow with patience, the moose that can snap a man in half if he stumbles too close in the wrong season. I prepared for those. I studied tracking, learned the language of scat and claw marks, trained my body to move with care. I chopped wood through summers, hunted through autumns, trapped through winters. I thought I had made a truce with the land, but the land is not what haunts me. The animals are not what I fear. It began slowly. At first, there were nights when the forest went too quiet. Even in the coldest months, you hear things: the crack of trees splitting, the scrape of hairs across the crust of snow, the whistle of wind pressing itself between the pines. One January night, I heard none of it. The fire in my cabin snapped and hissed, but beyond the walls nothing moved. I stepped outside, lantern in hand, and the silence pressed against me like a weight. My boots made no sound on the snow. My breath plumed, but I could not hear it. I clapped my hands, and the sound was swallowed before it could echo. I stood there until the lantern shook in my grip. I tried to shout, just my own name.
Jonathan!
And though my mouth opened, I heard only the rattle of air in my throat, nothing that carried. The forest absorbed me. Then, just as sudden, sound returned. A crow's call, harsh and ragged, followed by the groan of trees bowing against the wind. I rushed back inside and barred the door, as though from a storm. The silence came again the next week. Then again the week after that. It did not matter if the moon was full or hidden, if snow fell or the stars blazed overhead. It came when it pleased, and each time it lasted longer. By March, other things began to happen. One morning I found tracks in the snow circling the cabin. At first, I thought them wolf. But wolves do not walk in perfect circles, paw after paw placed evenly apart as if traced with a compass. Wolves do not stop at the door and leave the faint imprint of something pressed against the wood. I knelt and saw, to my disbelief, what looked like 5 digits. Too long for a hand, too narrow for a paw. They stretched from the edge of the track to the place where it had leaned against my cabin, as though something had crouched and pressed its strange fingers to the door in the night. I did not sleep the next night. I kept the lantern burning, rifle across my knees, ears straining for every groan of the timbers. At some hour past midnight, I heard it, the crunch of snow outside, slow, deliberate. The cabin walls are thin enough that every step reverberates through them. I waited for the sound to pass. It did not. It stopped just outside the door. I lifted the rifle and aimed at the wood, finger trembling on the trigger. Then, silence. The kind of silence that steals the air, the kind that feels alive. I do not remember falling asleep. I only remember waking to a pale light and finding the door unmarked. No tracks, no claw, no hand. Only unbroken snow, smooth as paper. You might ask why I stayed. Why I did not pack what I could and make the trek south. The truth is simple: the wilderness does not release you so easily. I built this cabin with my own hands, cut the trees that hold it upright, laid the stones that guard the hearth. To abandon it would feel like admitting that something else rules me, something I cannot name. Stubbornness is a dangerous trait, but it has kept me alive before. Still, there are things that stubbornness cannot explain. One evening, late spring, the thaw had just begun, and the river that curls near my cabin had broken open in jagged seams of ice. I sat by the shore, lines cast for trout, when I heard someone calling my name. Not a shout, not an echo, just a clear voice, close, as though someone stood behind me. Jonathan. I spun, heart hammering, but the bank was empty. The trees whispered in the breeze, water gurgled between ice flows, yet no one stood there. I told myself it had been a trick, the sound of water striking hollow ice. But the voice had been shaped. It had spoken with intent. Later that night, the same voice whispered again, just outside my window. I have tried to write these things down as factually as I can, though even as I place the words on paper, they feel unreal. But I assure you, they happened. They happened to me, and each one has pulled me further from whatever steady ground I once thought I had. What unsettles me most is that none of it feels random. The silence, the tracks, the voice, each seems to be drawing closer, circling me, pressing in as though to study what I am, or to remind me that I am the trespasser here. I came to these woods to escape people. Now something else has found me, something that does not belong to the animals or the seasons, and it has not stopped. The first time I truly feared for my life came at the height of summer. The forest was swollen with heat, every pine breathing sap, every stream running thin and sluggish. I had taken to sleeping with the windows open, trying to let even the faintest breeze roll through the cabin. One night, as I lay on my cot, I felt something brush my cheek. Not an insect, not the restless twitch of dream. It was the unmistakable touch of fingers, cool against my skin. I sat up with a shout, striking the lantern alight. The cabin was empty. The windows gaped wide, the screen intact. Nothing stirred. I told myself it had been a dream. But on my cheek, a faint smear remained, darker than dirt, more like ash, trailing from the corner of my mouth to my jawline. I washed it off until my skin burned, but I could still feel it there, a residue not of the body but of the mind. After that, I began to sense it watching more openly. When I hauled buckets from the river, I would glance up to see a shape at the far tree line, too dark to be shadow, too tall to be a man. When I split logs, I would feel its gaze pressing the back of my neck. I tried to catch it in glass, holding up my binoculars, turning my scope toward the shimmer of branches, but it vanished every time. It was not only me who sensed it. My dog, an old shepherd named Alder, had been my only companion since I moved north. Loyal, sharp, never one to spook without reason. One evening, he stiffened by the doorway, hackles raised, lips peeled back from his teeth. He growled low, steady, a sound I had never heard from him. I followed his gaze and saw, beyond the edge of the clearing, something standing perfectly still. It was dusk, that bruised hour when the light is neither day nor night. At first I thought it a man, broad-shouldered, with limbs longer than natural. It did not move, did not blink. Its skin, if it had skin, seemed the color of wet stone. Alder barked, lunged forward, and in that instant, the thing dissolved. It did not step back, did not turn. It collapsed inward, folding into the trees as if it had been part of them all along. I tried to calm Alder, though my own hands shook. He would not settle, pacing all night, ears cocked, throat rumbling at the walls. By dawn, he had worn a track into the floorboards. Days passed. The heat thickened. Alder would not go beyond the cabin's edge, and I had to drag water myself, my eyes darting with every rustle in the brush. Then, one morning, I found the dog gone. The door was closed, the windows latched, yet Alder was nowhere. I searched the clearing, the river, the edge of the forest, calling his name until my voice cracked. Nothing answered. No prints, no trail, no blood. Only silence so deep it burned my ears. That night I left the lantern burning in the window, in case he found his way back. Instead, I heard his bark, faint, drifting through the trees. Relief surged through me, but when I ran to the door and flung it open, the sound did not come closer. It circled instead, moving with deliberate steps, first to the north, then to the west, then behind me, each time the bark repeating at the same distance, the same pitch. I knew then that it was not Alder. Something had learned his voice. I slammed the door, bolted it, pressed my hands to my ears, but I could still hear it muffled, as though the sound carried through my own bones. Alder, it called, though the tone slipped, distorted. Not quite a bark, not quite a human word. I lay on the floor until morning, unable to move. For a week after, I lived as though hunted. I set traps. I carved sharpened stakes and placed them around the cabin. I built a fire that I never let die. I barely slept. And each night, when exhaustion finally took me, I woke to some new sign. Once a smear of wet handprints across the wall, as if pressed from within. Once the door unlatched, though I had sealed it with iron nails. Once, the smell of Alder's fur, wet and musky, thick in my bed, as if he had lain beside me all night. I thought of leaving then. I thought of walking south, following the river until I reached a road, abandoning all I had built. But the land held me, or perhaps the thing did. Some force pressed down, whispering that if I left, it would follow, and that the wilderness would not let me go until I saw it for what it truly was. It was late August when I finally saw its face. The moon hung low, full and swollen, painting the forest in silver. I had stepped outside with my rifle, more ritual now than protection, scanning the clearing before bed. At the edge of the trees, where the darkness knit itself into columns, it waited. The body was shaped like a man, but taller, leaner, joints bent wrong. Its skin, or what I took for skin, seemed carved of bark, ridged and rough, though when it shifted, it shimmered like stone under water. But the face was Alder's. My dog's eyes, my dog's muzzle, stretched grotesque over a human frame. Its mouth opened, and in my dog's voice it said, "Jonathan." I raised the rifle and fired. The sound tore through the night, echoing back a dozen times, rattling in my skull. The figure collapsed, not in death but in dissolution, breaking apart into fragments of shadow that slid between the trees. When the echoes died, the forest was empty. I did not find a body. I did not find blood. Only the smell of alder, sharp and pungent, clinging to my hands. That was when I stopped pretending this was something I could fight. Bullets mean nothing. Fire means nothing. It wears what it wants. It speaks how it pleases, and yet, it has not killed me. It could have, 100 times over. Instead, it circles, watching, pressing, as though waiting for something. The wilderness I once thought untamed has turned into a stage, and I the actor trapped on it. Every night, the performance repeats silence, imitation, apparition. But I know the climax has not yet come. Something deeper waits, patient as the forest itself. I stopped counting the days after that night. Time does not move the same when you are waiting for something to show itself. The sun rises, the sun falls, but the rhythm of the forest becomes erratic. Some mornings the birds sing as if nothing is wrong, their calls loud enough to sting. Other mornings, nothing stirs at all, and I wake with the weight of silence already pressing my chest before I even leave the bed. I tried to track it. Foolish, maybe, but I needed to know if I could follow the thing back to whatever hole it crawled from. I studied the ground at the edge of the clearing, looked for bent grass, snapped twigs, the faintest impressions in the soil. More than once, I found them not paw prints, not human, not bare. Long, narrow shapes, toes that stretched too far forward, a stride too even, too deliberate. I followed them through the spruce, every step gnawing at me. The deeper I went, the stranger the woods grew. Trees bent together in impossible arches, bark split open as though gnawed by teeth taller than my head. I found stones stacked into towers, balanced with a precision no hand could manage. Once, I saw a tree trunk burned black from the inside out, the wood hollow yet the bark untouched, as if fire had crawled within it like a parasite. Each path I took seemed to circle me back toward the river, no matter which direction I chose. It was as if the forest itself refused to let me leave. At night, I dreamed things I could not remember upon waking, only scraps of sensation, running through snow without leaving tracks, crouching at the cabin door and pressing my hand against it, staring at my own reflection in the water and seeing it blink when I did not. Some mornings I woke with mud under my fingernails, my feet damp, as if I had walked outside without knowing. I began to fear not just what watched me, but what I was becoming under its gaze. Then came the night of the knocking. It started softly, 3 taps against the wall, evenly spaced. I thought at first it was a branch shifting in the wind, but the rhythm repeated, louder this time, moving across the wall toward the window. My skin prickled. I gripped the rifle and waited. Then the knock shifted to the door, slow, deliberate. 1, 2, 3. "Jonathan," it whispered. Not Alder's voice this time. Not my dog, my own. I froze. The sound was unmistakable, the cadence, the tone, the way my name seemed to catch at the end. It was me. Someone, or something, stood on the other side of the door and spoke with my exact voice. I pressed the barrel to the wood, shaking, and shouted, "Leave! The echo of my own voice came back from outside, perfect in pitch, mocking in its steadiness. Then the handle rattled. The door strained against the bolt. I backed away, heart hammering, until the cot pressed against my knees. The door never broke, but the knocking continued for hours, fading only when the sky grew pale and the birds began their morning chatter. I did not sleep after that. I could not. I began to fear the boundaries between myself and whatever it was. If it could wear Alder's face, if it could use my voice, what else could it take? The following evening, I made a decision. I packed a small kit, knife, flint, canteen, and set out to follow the river south. I told myself I would leave the cabin behind, no matter what it cost. The path was rough, brush snagging my clothes, mosquitoes humming in clouds, but the river gave me a line to follow. I walked until the sky bruised with twilight. Then, ahead of me, I saw a glow. At first I thought it a campfire. Relief surged through me. People. Perhaps hunters, trappers, anyone I could beg help from. I hurried forward, heart lifting. But as I drew close, the glow shifted. It was not fire, it was lantern light, my lantern. There, on the bank, stood my cabin. Perfectly whole. The same roof, the same door. Smoke curling from the chimney. But I had walked south all day. I had not turned back. And still, here it was, waiting for me. I staggered closer, too stunned to resist. Through the window I saw movement, a figure inside, seated at my table. My breath caught in my throat. It was me. Myself, sat in the chair, head bowed, hands clasped, as though in prayer. I stumbled back, crashing into the brush. The figure raised its head, and though the distance should have hidden his face, I saw his eyes. They were mine, but darker, as if hollowed. He smiled, my smile, and blew out the lantern. The cabin and all its light dissolved into the trees. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing at the base of a pine. I do not remember crawling back to the true cabin, but I woke there at dawn, mud streaked on my arms, pine needles tangled in my hair. I did not leave again. The wilderness had made it clear I could not. Since that night, the doubling has worsened. I catch glimpses of myself in the woods, standing between the trees watching. Sometimes I hear my own footsteps behind me, perfectly in sync until I stop, and then one more follows. I no longer trust mirrors, for I have seen the reflection grin before I did. What does it want? Why does it not finish what it begins? I do not know. But each encounter frays me thinner. Each day I wake with less certainty of where I end and it begins. And the silence, it returns more often now, lasting longer, pressing against my skull until I feel I might burst. In those stretches, I cannot hear the river, cannot hear my breath, cannot even hear the beat of my heart. It is as if I have ceased to exist, save for the weight of its eyes in the dark. I do not know how much longer I can endure this. The silence has grown into something I dread more than death. When it falls now, it does not simply strip the world of sound. It reaches inside me and cuts away thought itself, leaving me suspended, empty, aware only of the pressure of being watched. Sometimes it lasts for minutes, sometimes for hours. The last time it stretched through an entire night, and I do not remember a single dream, a single shift of my own body. Nothing at all until the sun touched the cabin wall. The forest has begun to change around me in ways that make no sense. Trails I walked 100 times now end in walls of stone where no cliffs should be. The river bends back upon itself, creating impossible loops, as though geography has surrendered to something else's design. I mark trees with my axe, only to find the marks vanish when I circle back. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. Now I am convinced it is not my mind that fails but the land itself, reshaping to keep me contained. I began keeping notes in a leather journal, dates, times, what I see, what I hear. But the entries alter themselves. Whole passages change while I sleep. I wake to find words I never wrote. He is learning. He is almost ready. The woods will take him back. The handwriting is mine, but I swear upon my life, I did not write those lines. One evening, I found pages torn out, scattered across the floor as though flung by wind. Each page bore only one word, written over and over until the paper tore stay. I burned them in the hearth, but the smoke that rose was not wood smoke. It was sweet, almost floral, and when it drifted through the cabin, I felt light, headed, as if something had filled my lungs with its own breath. I thought perhaps the wilderness wanted to drive me mad, to unmake me piece by piece. But madness implies chaos. What I feel is not chaos. It is direction. Every event, every silence, every apparition points towards something deliberate. And then came the night I saw the procession. I had been unable to sleep, pacing the cabin until the lantern guttered. Near midnight, I stepped to the window. At first, I thought I saw fireflies weaving through the trees, but they moved in formation, dozens of pale orbs floating in a line. As they drew closer, I realized they were not lights at all, but faces. Faces pale as bone, eyeless, drifting above the ground. Their mouths hung open, but no sound passed their lips. They floated past the clearing in silence, one after another, vanishing into the trees beyond. At the center of the line, taller than the rest, walked the figure. The same thing that had worn Alder's face, that had spoken in my voice, that had smiled from my cabin window. Its head turned toward me as it passed. The faces followed, every empty socket fixed upon my window. I could not move. I could not breathe. Only when the last of them vanished did the air return to my lungs. The next morning, I found prints circling the cabin again. This time they were mine. Bare feet, heel to toe, etched deep in the soil, pacing endlessly until they overlapped in a groove. My own steps, walking in circles while I slept. I barricaded the door, nailed the windows shut, but still the signs grew worse. Some nights I wake with dirt between my toes. Other nights, the cot is empty when I rise, as though I had never lain there at all. I fear now that I am being hollowed, that whatever watches does not intend to kill me but to inhabit me, to wear me as it wore my dog, as it wore my reflection. My body, my voice, my life, turned into its own. The clearest proof came 3 days ago. I woke to find my journal open on the table. The entry read, "You are not Jonathan Mercer." Not anymore. My hand had written it. My name signed below. I tore the page out, fed it to the fire, swore never to look at the journal again. But when I glanced at the mirror above the basin, the reflection that looked back did not mimic me. Its lips moved before mine, forming words I could not hear. Then it grinned, too wide, too eager, and I smashed the glass with my fist. Blood ran down my knuckles, bright against the wood, and in that moment the silence fell again. The world dimmed, soundless, and behind me I felt breath, slow and steady. I turned, but nothing stood there, only the weight of something filling the room. When the silence broke, the blood was gone. My hand was clean. The shards of glass lay on the floor, but my reflection no longer appeared in them. I am writing this now by lantern light, though the flame trembles as if blown by unseen breath. I no longer know how much of me is left. Each word I put to paper feels less like mine and more like dictation. Still, I write, because perhaps if I can keep the story tethered to the page, I can anchor myself a little longer. But I feel it watching me now. I feel it leaning closer, and I am no longer certain I am alone in this cabin. I have always believed that when the mind breaks, it does so quietly. That madness creeps in subtle, until one morning you wake and realize you no longer trust the shape of the world. But what has come upon me here is not quiet. It is violent, insistent, pressing against me with such force that I feel my thoughts fracture like ice beneath a heavy boot. 3 nights ago, I woke outside. Not in my cot, not within the walls of the cabin I built, but lying in the clearing with the stars gaping down at me. My clothes were damp with dew, my feet bare, and my hands buried deep in the soil, as though I had clawed at the earth in my sleep. Around me, arranged in a perfect circle, were stones. Each stone was carved with lines I did not understand. Spirals, slashes, symbols that burned my eyes if I stared too long. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering, and fled inside, leaving the circle behind. When morning came, I forced myself back out, needing to see, to know I had not dreamed it. The clearing was bare. No stones, no marks, no circle. Only smooth earth and the faint trail of my own prints leading back to the cabin. That day, I swore I would not sleep again. I brewed coffee until my hands shook, sat upright at the table with the rifle across my knees. But exhaustion is not a thing a man can fight for long. Sometime near dawn, my eyes betrayed me, and I woke once more to find myself outside. This time I was kneeling, not in the clearing, but at the riverbank. My reflection stared back from the water, darker than it should have been, its grin already formed before mine. My hands cupped water as though offering it to the sky. I staggered back, choking on air, and only then realized my lips were moving. I was whispering words I did not know, words that did not belong to me. The sound of them clung to my ears long after I stopped. Since then, I have begun to notice changes in my own body. My nails grow too quickly, blackened at the edges as though burned. My eyes catch the lantern light in ways they should not. And when I speak aloud, sometimes the echo comes before the word leaves my lips. The silence that has stalked me for months has turned into something worse. It is not absence anymore. It is full, a density, a presence that drapes itself over me. When it falls, I no longer struggle against it. I find myself sinking into it, comforted almost, as though returning to something I once knew. 2 nights ago, I dreamed of the procession again. The pale faces floated past, their mouths open in voiceless chant. At their center, the figure turned toward me, but this time it did not wear Alder's face, nor my own. It wore both, flickering between them, dog and man, voice and silence, shifting as though trying on different masks until it settled on something new. Me, but not as I am now. Me as I will become. I woke with tears streaking my face, though I could not say why. The grief was sharp, but so was the relief, as though some buried part of me longed for what it showed. I am writing this by lamplight again, but the shadows no longer behave. They lean when they should not, stretch against the corners of the cabin as though pulled by invisible strings. When I move, they hesitate, a beat too long before following. And tonight, just before I set pen to paper, I heard voices outside. Not one, not the mimicry of Alder, nor the echo of my own. Many low murmuring threading through the trees in cadence. They did not call my name. They did not beg or threaten. They chanted. The rhythm matched the words I had whispered at the river. I opened the door, against every instinct, and stepped into the clearing. The moon was gone, the stars smothered, yet the trees glowed faintly, lit from within by some hidden pulse. At the far edge of the clearing, shapes gathered, not solid, not smoke, not shadow, something between all three. Faces floated pale within them, mouths open in that soundless chant. At their center, the figure waited, taller than the rest, patient, certain. It did not move toward me, did not lunge or beckon. It only stood, as if to say, "It is time." I shut the door, bolted it, and pressed my back against the wood. The voices have not stopped since. They circle the cabin, rise and fall like the tide. I feel the boards beneath my feet thrum with their rhythm, as though the forest itself hums along. I am afraid, yes, but beneath the fear there is something else I do not want to admit. A pull, a hunger, a sense that if I opened the door and walked into that gathering, I would understand at last what has haunted me, that I would no longer be prey, no longer alone. And I do not know how much longer I can resist. I have not slept in 2 nights, Yet I feel no fatigue. The voices do not stop. They swell and fade, sometimes drifting far into the forest, sometimes pressing right up against the walls, as though they breathe through the cracks in the wood. The rhythm has become part of me. My heart now beats in time with it, steady as a drum, unbroken even when I hold my breath. The journal lies open before me, though my hand moves without my command. The words form themselves, my pen scratching across the page in a script I can barely follow. He is ready. The woods remember. The body is only a vessel. I try to stop, to drop the pen, but my fingers clutch it like a claw. Only when the sentence ends do I regain control, trembling as I stare at what I have written. Last night, the silence fell again, heavier than ever. Not only sound vanished, light dimmed, color drained, air thickened until it felt like I was breathing through water. In that suffocating stillness, I felt it enter, not through the door, not through the window, through me. My lungs filled with something that was not air. My thoughts split like timber under an axe. For a moment, I saw two versions of the cabin, one dark and crumbling, filled with shapes that crouched and swayed, the other my own, small and bare. Then both merged, and I was left kneeling on the floor, mouth open, breathless. When the silence broke, I laughed. I did not mean to. The sound burst from me, harsh and unfamiliar, a voice stretched too thin. It echoed even after I stopped. This morning, I found my reflection again, on the surface of the river. It smiled before I approached, lips already curled, and then it spoke, not aloud, but through me. Its mouth moved, and the words slipped past my own lips, though I did not will them. Tonight, I staggered back, nearly falling into the water. The reflection lingered, grinning, until the current warped it into nothing. Now the sun is down again, and I sit at the table with the lantern guttering low. The chanting outside has grown louder, the faces pressing closer. I see them through the gaps in the shutters, pale and endless, circling in their procession. At their center, it waits, the tall figure. My face stretched over its bones, my eyes hollowed. The door shudders, though no hand touches it. The walls bend inward as if the forest itself leans closer. I can hear my name, whispered not once but 1,000 times, layered until it becomes a single unbroken note. I could resist, perhaps, fire the rifle until the barrel glows, scream until my throat tears, run south until my legs break beneath me. But what would it matter? The land itself turns against me. The river bends back upon itself. The trails twist like knots. There is no leaving. There has never been leaving. I understand that now. The wilderness is not empty. It never was. It is alive in a way no map, no compass, no human mind can hold. And I have been chosen, not to escape it, not to fight it, but to join it. The lantern sputters. The chanting grows. The silence falls again, heavier than ever, and I feel it fill my chest. I drop the pen, though even now words etch themselves on the page without me. Welcome home. I rise, though I do not command my legs. I walk to the door, though my hands shake at the bolt. The wood is cold, wet with dew that should not be there. The voices stop as my fingers touch the latch. For the first time in months, the forest waits in silence. Not heavy, not oppressive, but expectant. I open the door. What stands outside is me, and not me. Its grin stretches wide, welcoming. The procession sways, endless faces turning toward me. My voice, their voices, the wilderness itself, all speak at once. Jonathan. I step forward, and the forest closes behind me. My name is Andrew Whitman, and in the summer of 2017, I accepted a seasonal job on a farm in southern Ontario. I was 21 years old then, freshly out of college with no real plan for what came next, and like so many in between moments in life, I found myself restless, searching for a way to fill the long weeks before September arrived. I thought a job in the countryside would be simple, honest work in the fields, a chance to clear my head, to build my strength and earn some money before I decided whether graduate school or the wider world was waiting for me. What I did not know, and what I could not have guessed, was that this farm came with rules unlike any I had ever imagined, rules that stretched beyond reason into something that still wakes me from sleep years later. The farm belonged to a man named Henry Calloway, though everyone simply called him Mr. Calloway. He was well into his 60s, with skin browned and creased from decades under the sun, and he carried himself with the stern gravity of someone who had seen everything and trusted little. His farm sat on 200 acres of rolling pasture and cornfields, broken by long rows of old maple and oak that had never been cut down. A gravel lane wound from the county road, past a weather-worn barn, and ended at a white farmhouse with green shutters and a deep porch where rocking chairs creaked in the wind. The place had the charm of age, but also a weight to it, as though time itself pressed more heavily there. When I arrived on the first day of June, I expected nothing more than chores and sweat. Mr. Calloway met me on the porch, his eyes pale blue and sharp, his handshake rough as bark. He asked only 3 questions: if I was strong, if I was respectful, and if I could follow rules. I answered yes to each, half smiling, trying to prove I wasn't some careless city kid. He did not smile back. Instead, he studied me in silence until I felt the weight of that gaze burrow down to my bones. Then he nodded once, told me where I would be sleeping, and warned me that the rules of his farm were not suggestions. I laughed a little, thinking he meant chores would need to be done on time, or that I shouldn't wander off into the neighbor's land. He did not laugh with me. "This place has ways of its own," he said. "If you want to stay safe here, you will listen and you will obey." At the time, I thought it was nothing more than the gruff seriousness of an old farmer trying to impress discipline on a young hire. I had no frame of reference to see it as anything else. The small room I was given sat upstairs in the farmhouse, facing the fields. Its single window opened onto a stretch of corn that seemed to ripple endlessly, a green sea bending in the summer wind. There was a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a dresser whose drawers stuck when pulled, and a crucifix nailed above the doorframe. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something sharper, almost metallic, that I couldn't quite place. I told myself it was the tang of well water or rust in the old pipes. The work began the next morning before the sun rose. I was roused by the ringing of a brass handbell in the hallway, followed by the sound of boots clomping down the stairs. Bleary-eyed, I dressed and went outside where a half-dozen other workers had already gathered near the barn. Most were locals, men and women hardened by years of this labor. They nodded to me but did not smile. No one spoke much as we set about feeding the animals, hauling sacks of feed, fixing broken fence posts, and tending to the long rows of vegetables. The hours blurred, measured only by sweat, the arc of the sun, and the endless sound of insects buzzing in the heat. It was only after supper that the rules were explained to me. We had eaten in silence at the long wooden table, bowls of stew, and thick slices of bread disappearing quickly, with the clink of spoons and the scrape of chairs the only sounds. When the plates were cleared, Mr. Calloway remained seated at the head of the table and motioned for me to stay. One by one, the other workers left, glancing at me as though to gauge my reaction. Finally, when the room was empty save for the 2 of us, he leaned back and folded his arms. "There are rules here," he said again. "You'll follow them, or you'll leave. There is no middle ground." I nodded, still half expecting him to list off mundane tasks about tool care or timetables. Instead, he began reciting rules that even now, when I think of them, chill me. The first rule was that once the sun set, no one was to stand at the windows. Curtains must be drawn, and under no circumstance should I look out into the fields after dark. The second was that if I heard my name called at night, even by a familiar voice, I must never answer. No matter what I thought I heard, no matter how urgent or desperate the voice seemed, I was to stay silent until morning. The third rule concerned the scarecrows. The farm had many, scattered across the fields, old straw figures in tattered coats and hats. They were never to be touched, moved, or examined closely. If one fell, I was not to pick it up. If one appeared closer to the house than before, I was not to acknowledge it. The fourth was that the barn must always be locked before sundown. If I ever found the doors ajar in the night, I was not to enter, not even to shut them. And the last rule, the one he delivered in a voice so low I could barely hear it, was this: if I ever woke in the night and found someone sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, I was not to speak to them, not to open the door, not to make a sound. I was to wait until morning, when the chair would be empty again. I sat frozen, unsure whether to laugh or to ask if this was some twisted farm initiation ritual. But when I looked into Mr. Calloway's eyes, I saw no humor there, only an iron seriousness that brooked no challenge. "These are not superstitions," he said. "They are survival. You'll see." And I did see, though not all at once. The strangeness of the farm revealed itself in increments, like the slow peeling of bark from an old tree. The first night, I drew the curtains as instructed, though curiosity gnawed at me. Lying in bed, I could hear the wind rustling through the corn, a sound like whispers layered upon whispers. It was easy to imagine voices, fragments of words half formed. At one point, I thought I heard my own name carried faintly across the rows. Andrew, Andrew. But I told myself it was fatigue and the suggestive power of rules planted in my head. I forced my eyes shut and drifted into uneasy sleep. The next day was uneventful, hard work under a blazing sky, the kind that leaves the skin raw and the body aching. Yet as dusk approached, I caught sight of one of the scarecrows from the corner of my eye. It stood at the edge of the cornfield, its head drooping, its coat flapping raggedly in the breeze. Something about it unsettled me, though I couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was the way the shadows lengthened around it, making its outline look less like straw and more like a hunched figure waiting. I remembered the rule and kept walking. On the third night, I woke to a sound on the porch. The house was silent except for the old timbers creaking. I lay in the dark, heart pounding. As the sound came again, the rhythmic creak of the rocking chair just outside my window. Someone was sitting there. I could picture it clearly, though the curtains were drawn tight. The chair rocked slowly, back and forth, as though whoever sat there had all the time in the world. I bit down hard on my tongue to keep from making a sound, every muscle rigid with fear. Eventually, near dawn, the creaking ceased, and when I finally gathered the courage to peek outside, the chair was empty, swaying gently in the morning breeze. I wanted to ask the others about it, to demand some explanation, but when I tried, the words stuck. Their faces were closed, their silence heavy. They had all lived with these rules long enough to stop questioning. I was the outsider, still raw, still resistant, and so the days bled into one another, work and silence by day, fear and whispers by night. I began to notice other things too. How sometimes, in the corner of my eye, a scarecrow seemed closer than before. How the wind in the trees carried fragments of song, half-remembered lullabies. How the shadows beneath the barn door never quite aligned with what should have been inside. Each detail alone was nothing, but together they built a picture of a place that was wrong in its bones. I had come to the farm seeking clarity and strength. What I found instead was a set of rules that felt less like guidance and more like chains, rules meant to keep something out or to keep something in. and I began to wonder. Late at night when the rocking chair creaked, and my name drifted through the corn, which of those it truly was. The days on the farm blurred into a rhythm that felt older than any clock. Sunrise pulled us from our beds, the handbell ringing sharp in the air, and the first hours of daylight belonged to feeding, mending, hauling. The fields stretched so far that when I worked the rows, I felt swallowed by green walls of corn higher than my shoulders. Dust clung to my throat, and my muscles grew leaner and tighter with each day. Yet no matter how spent I became by dusk, my mind remained restless, haunted by the rules I had sworn to follow. Each night carried its own test. By the fifth evening, I had stopped pretending not to hear the voices that slipped through the windows. They knew my name, and worse, they spoke with the tones of people I loved. One night I heard my sister Emily's voice calling, frightened and small, as though she were lost in the field. Another time, it was my father, using a phrase only he ever said to me when I was a boy. I lay there sweating, my fists pressed against my ears, every instinct in me screaming to rise, to answer, to throw the curtains wide and prove it was all illusion. But fear anchored me in place, and by dawn the voices dissolved into nothing but wind. I could not bring myself to tell Missipple Calloway what I heard. He had already warned me, and I did not want to see the satisfaction in his eyes when he learned how close I had come to breaking. Instead, I worked harder by day, trying to exhaust myself into dreamless sleep. It never quite worked. Sleep came, but never gently. It was on the 10th night that I first saw one of the scarecrows move. I had gone out late to fetch water from the pump. The moon was bright, silvering the fields, and as I bent over the handle, I felt a prickle crawl down my neck. I glanced up, and there, 20 yards into the corn, one of the figures shifted. Not in the wind's tug, but with intention. A drooping head rising slightly, a crooked arm twitching like a man stretching stiff muscles. I froze, my hands locked on the pump handle. For a heartbeat, the world held still, the frogs quiet, the insects silenced, even the air waiting. Then the figure slumped again, sagging into its straw-stuffed frame. I backed away, nearly tripping, the bucket spilling water across my boots. I did not look back until I reached the farmhouse porch, where the rocking chair stood motionless, empty. But I knew what I had seen. That night I double-latched my door. The next morning, I asked one of the older hands, a wary man named Bill, how long he had worked there. His face was leathered by sun and his eyes downcast as he replied, "Long enough." I pressed, asking if the rules were really necessary, if he had ever broken them. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But then he only shook his head and said, "I did once. That's why I limp." He left before I could ask what he meant. I began to notice his limp after that, a dragging hitch in his right leg, as though one knee bent the wrong way. I wondered what the cost had been, and what had tried to claim him when he strayed. By mid-June, the strangeness grew bolder. The barn doors, though locked each evening, sometimes stood ajar at dawn. Mr. Calloway would send 2 men to close them, while the rest of us stayed away. When I asked why, he said, "Because if something walked in overnight, it doesn't want to be seen leaving." His tone left no room for more questions. But it was the porch that haunted me most. Nearly every other night, the chair rocked. I would wake in the dark, pulse racing, and hear the slow creak, creak outside my door. Once, I thought I glimpsed a shadow under the crack of the curtain, long legs folded, arms resting on knees. I couldn't tell if the figure was watching the fields or facing the house. I told myself not to breathe too loud, not to shift in bed, not to give myself away. By morning, the porch would be empty, but the faint depression in the seat cushion proved something had been there. The weight of silence began to crush me. The other workers spoke little, their eyes hollowed by years of enduring. It seemed to me they had given up even the luxury of curiosity, living only from meal to meal, sunrise to sunrise. I couldn't bear it. One evening, after supper, I lingered and asked Mr. Calloway directly why these rules existed. He looked at me for a long time before answering. "You think you're owed an explanation?" he asked. I swallowed, but didn't back down. He tapped a finger on the table, his gaze shifting toward the window where the sun was bleeding low. "This land is old. Older than my family, older than the county. The things here, they don't want you. They want your notice. Your answer. Once you give it, you're theirs. That's all you need to know." I asked him then why he didn't simply leave, sell the land, escape it all. He leaned forward, voice lowering. "Because you don't sell this kind of thing. You keep it contained. You pass the rules on to the next, and you pray they're strong enough." His words shook me more than the rules ever had. Containment. That meant it was always pressing, always waiting, something larger than any one man could control. That night, the voices outside my window grew louder, almost angry. They called not just my name but commands. "Look out. Andrew. Open the door. Come see." I sat in the dark, fists clenched, sweat soaking my shirt, and whispered to myself, "No, no, no," until dawn broke pale across the fields. I should have left then. I should have packed and walked down that gravel lane and never looked back. But pride, and some darker thread of fascination, kept me tethered. I wanted to understand. I wanted to see what lay behind the rules. And soon enough, I would. The first true breach came on a stormy night in late June. Lightning carved the sky, thunder shook the windows, and rain hammered the roof in deafening waves. I was half asleep when the sound cut through it all, a knocking at my door. Slow, deliberate 3 times. My blood froze. No one was supposed to walk the halls at night. The knocking came again, louder. Then a voice, soft and coaxing. My mother's voice, though she lived hundreds of miles away. "Andrew," it said. "Sweetheart, let me in. Please, just let me in." My heart ached to hear her tone, the tender lilt I hadn't heard in years. For a moment, my hand reached for the knob. But something in me remembered the rule, the iron weight of Mr. Calloway's voice. "If you hear your name at night, do not answer." I pulled my hand back and pressed my palms over my ears. The voice went on for hours, sometimes pleading, sometimes furious, sometimes sobbing. Only when the first gray light touched the curtains did it fade. When I opened the door at last, the hallway was empty. But the floorboards outside were damp, as though bare feet had paced there all night long. The next day, I stumbled through my chores hollow-eyed. Mr. Calloway said nothing, but I caught him watching me with grim approval, as though I had passed a test. I hated him for it. Still I stayed, against every warning. Against the dread that thickened with each sunset, I remained. Because now I had to know what waited if I did break a rule, what would step through if I let it, and soon, far sooner than I wanted, I would learn the answer. The farm tested me in ways I never expected, and by July, I was no longer the same young man who had arrived with bright ideas of hard work and clear skies. I had grown lean, yes, but also haggard. My eyes carried shadows that never lifted, my hands trembled in quiet moments, and each night stretched longer than the last. The rules had not only governed my actions, they had rewritten my instincts, trained me to resist the most natural impulses of human life, to look when something called, to speak when spoken to seek comfort in a familiar voice. Now, every kindness I heard in the dark was a trap, every sound a test, every glimpse of motion at the edge of the fields a question I dared not answer. But questions demand answers. And though I had resisted so far, some restless part of me burned to know what lay behind the curtain of rules. I told myself I could endure forever, But the truth is that curiosity is its own hunger, and hunger gnaws until it is fed. The first crack came not from me but from another. One of the younger workers, a boy named Caleb no older than 19, broke down after a week of torment. He had the room beside mine, and more than once I heard him sobbing in the dark as voices called to him. On the 7th night, I woke to the sound of his door opening. My heart lurched as I heard him whisper, "Mom," in a trembling voice, then footsteps padding down the hall. I wanted to leap up, to grab him and drag him back, but fear pinned me. I could not risk opening my own door. Through the crack of my curtain, I caught sight of the porch below. Lightning flashed across the yard, and in that searing white light I saw Caleb standing barefoot, staring into the field. Something stood opposite him at the edge of the corn, a figure, tall and thin, its arms too long, its head cocked at an impossible angle. The flash ended, plunging everything into black. The next strike of lightning showed an empty porch. Caleb was gone. Morning came heavy and gray. At breakfast, his chair sat vacant. No one spoke his name, not even Mr. Calloway. I waited for someone to demand we look for him, to call the police, to sound an alarm. No one did. The silence was worse than his absence. Finally, I asked where he had gone. Calloway's eyes fixed on me, unblinking, and he said he broke the rules. Then he returned to his stew. That was the end of Caleb. I never saw him again. I tried to tell myself he had simply fled the farm, spooked by the night terrors, that he had walked the gravel road and hitched a ride home. But I knew better. The image of him staring at that figure in the corn would not leave me. I wondered if his family ever learned what had happened, or if his name was simply erased like a smudge on a window. The scarecrows grew bolder after that. By day, they looked the same, sagging, ragged, their straw spilling from sleeves and collars. But at dusk, I would notice one farther up the path than before, or turned slightly toward me when it hadn't been earlier. Once, while hauling hay, I swore one's head rotated to follow my steps. I dropped the bale and fled, pretending I hadn't seen. It was Bill, the limping man, who confirmed my fear without words. We were repairing a fence one hot afternoon, sweat streaking our faces when I muttered, "They move, don't they?" He froze. His hammer raised, then lowered it with a sigh. His eyes darted toward the nearest scarecrow before settling back on me. "Don't say it out loud," he warned. "Don't give them the satisfaction." Then he returned to his work, leaving me chilled. The barn grew stranger too. One morning, the double doors stood open despite having been locked. We gathered tense as Mr. Calloway entered alone. He came out 5 minutes later, his face pale and his hands shaking, though he said nothing. He simply ordered the doors chained and barred, then sent us back to work. From that day on, I swore I heard sounds from inside. Rustling, low groans, the scuttle of claws on wood. But if anyone else heard, they pretended not to. By mid-July, sleep had become a battle I often lost. On one particularly suffocating night, the air heavy with heat and the stink of rain soaked earth, I gave in to weakness. A voice called to me from beyond the curtain, and it was Emily again, my sister, the one person in the world I trusted more than anyone. She sounded desperate, terrified. "Andrew," she pleaded. "Please, I need you. It's me. I swear it's me. Just open the window." Tears stung my eyes. My body shook with the need to obey. I rose half in a trance and reached for the curtain. My fingers brushed the fabric, then froze. The memory of Caleb seared through me like fire. I yanked my hand back, stumbled to the bed, and pressed my face into the pillow until the sun rose. The next day, I asked Mr. Calloway how long the farm had been like this. He looked weary, older than his 60-some years, and for once his voice lacked its iron edge. "Always," he said simply. "My father before me, his father before him. The land doesn't change." only the ones trying to hold it back. Why stay? I asked again, the question that gnawed at me endlessly. Why not burn it down, leave it behind? He shook his head. Fire won't touch it, and leaving it free. He trailed off, but the fear in his eyes told me the rest. It was then that I understood the truth. The farm was not haunted. It was not cursed. It was a prison, a cage, holding things that should not walk freely, and Mr. Calloway was its reluctant warden. The rules were not superstition, but the bars that kept the cell intact. And I was one of the unwilling jailers now, caught by my own agreement to stay. The real breaking point came during the harvest moon, late July. The fields glowed pale under the swollen orb, and the air throbbed with insect song. I woke near midnight to a silence so complete it felt like drowning. Not a cricket, not a breeze, not a single creak in the old house. Only the sound of my own heartbeat. Then the rocking chair began to move. Slowly, creak by creak, it rocked on the porch below. I should have stayed still. I should have buried my head under the covers. But something about the silence, about the enormity of that moonlight, pushed me past fear into a reckless need. I rose from bed, my feet bare on the boards, and crept to the window. I lifted the curtain just a sliver. At first, I saw only the chair moving. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw the figure. It was not a person. Not in any sense I knew. Its shape bent wrong, too thin at the limbs, too heavy at the head, as though the weight of its skull dragged it down. Its hands gripped the chair's arms, long fingers curling and uncurling in rhythm with the rocking. And though the night was still, its form shimmered faintly, like heat haze above asphalt. I dropped the curtain and staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My mind screamed at me to scream, to run, to tear the door open and flee into the fields. But some instinct deeper than thought kept me frozen. The chair rocked until dawn. When the first rays of sun spilled across the porch, the creaking stopped. I told no one, but from that night on, I was changed. Fear no longer felt like enough. I had seen the edge of it, and some terrible part of me wanted to see more. And that was the beginning of my undoing. After the night of the harvest moon, something inside me tilted off balance. Until then, I had survived by clinging to the rules like a lifeline, refusing to give in to curiosity. But now that I had seen the figure in the rocking chair with my own eyes, the veil of ignorance was torn. The rules no longer felt like boundaries I must not cross. They felt like a map. Each prohibition was a signpost pointing to something hidden, and I burned with the need to know what they were keeping from me. I still did the work, still bent my back beneath the sun, still sweated alongside the others in the endless rows of corn and beans. But my mind was elsewhere. Every scarecrow seemed a dare. Every creak in the barn doors, an invitation. Every whispered voice at night, a key rattling against a locked door. The farm seemed to know my resolve was weakening. The strangeness pressed harder. Voices called more frequently. Some nights they came in chorus, dozens of familiar tones blending into a grotesque choir. My sister, my father, old friends, even professors from college, each voice demanding I look, answer, open. Sometimes they screamed. Sometimes they begged. Once, a voice identical to my own whispered from outside the window, "Please, Andrew, let me in. I'm so cold." That night I bit my hand until it bled just to keep from speaking. I wasn't the only one unraveling. Bill, the limping worker, grew quieter by the day. He had always been terse, but now he spoke not at all. I noticed him staring at the scarecrows too long, as though counting them, his lips moving silently. Once I caught him in the early dawn standing before one, his hand almost brushing the straw hand, his face slack with longing. When he noticed me, he jerked back and spat in the dirt, hobbling away. The others were no better. Meals at the long wooden table became ghostly affairs, no laughter, no talk. only the scrape of spoons and the shifting of chairs. I realized then that I was surrounded not by fellow workers, but by prisoners who had given up fighting. They obeyed the rules not out of strength, but out of defeat. That was the difference between us. I still fought, though my fight was twisted. I fought not to preserve the rules, but to break them, to force the truth into the open. The chance came in early August, on a night when the sky turned black with storm clouds, and rain lashed the windows. Lightning strobed across the land, painting the fields in bursts of silver. The voices outside were deafening, overlapping, urgent. But I did not wait for them. I rose, lit a lamp, and crept down the stairs. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat screaming at me to turn back. But my hand found the iron latch on the farmhouse door. The rocking chair was empty. The porch glistened with rain, and beyond, the barn loomed, its roof sheened with water, its chained doors rattling in the wind. I told myself I only wanted to look closer, to prove to myself that the rules were hollow threats. I crossed the yard, each step sucking in mud. The closer I drew, the more I felt the weight of the place pressing down. Like the air itself thickened, my lamp flame flickered, bending inward as if sucked toward the barn. I stopped at the chained doors. For a moment, the storm quieted. A pause in the downpour, and in that silence I heard it, something shifting inside. A drag, a thump, then a rasping breath. My whole body screamed to flee. Instead, I touched the wood. It was cold, so cold it burned. The chains rattled violently. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the lamp. Whatever was inside wanted out. I ran then, splashing through the mud, back to the farmhouse. Behind me, the barn doors thundered against their hinges, and I knew without doubt that had I unlatched them, I would not have seen another dawn. I thought Mr. Calloway would rage at me the next morning, that somehow he would know where I had gone. But he said nothing. Only his eyes, pale and hollow, flicked toward me once during breakfast, and that was enough. He knew. The days after that blurred. My defiance had not brought clarity, only more questions and a heavier dread. The scarecrows multiplied, or so it seemed. I could swear there were more each day, sprouting in places I hadn't seen before. One appeared just outside the line of trees where we dumped feed sacks. Another stood by the far pasture, leaning against the fence as though resting. They watched. Always watched. I tried to count them once. By my tally, there were 39. The next day, there were 41. By the following week, 44. I never spoke of it, but I saw the others glancing nervously too, their lips moving as they counted silently under their breath. The numbers never stayed the same. One evening, as we finished supper, Bill finally broke his silence. He set his spoon down and looked directly at me. "You're not going to make it," he said, his voice hoarse. The room froze. "Even miserable." Calloway stiffened. I asked him what he meant. He leaned closer, eyes bloodshot. "They'll take you before the season's out. You look too long, you listen too hard. They know when someone's ready." His words hollowed me out, because deep down, I knew he was right. Later that night, I lay in bed, unable to breathe for the weight of dread pressing my chest. The chair creaked outside again. Voices hissed through the corn. I clutched the blanket until my knuckles went white and whispered to myself that I could make it, that the summer would end, that I could leave. But each night stretched longer, and each morning I woke weaker. The collapse came in mid-August. I was carrying feed out to the far barn when I felt the sensation of being followed. I glanced back and froze. One of the scarecrows stood in the middle of the path behind me. It had not been there seconds before. Its head tilted, straw spilling from its collar. The air around it shimmered faintly. I ran. The feed sack tore, grain spilling behind me, but I didn't care. I sprinted until the farmhouse loomed, my lungs searing. When I looked back, the scarecrow was gone. That night, the voices were worse than ever. They screamed my name, pounded at the walls, rattled the doorknob of my room. At one point, the latch lifted, though I had locked it. Only my weight shoved against the door kept it closed. By dawn, I was broken. I stumbled down to the table, pale and trembling. Calloway studied me for a long time before saying, "You've seen too much. You need to decide if you're leaving, or if you'll stay and bind yourself to this place." I asked him what he meant by bind. His eyes darkened. "The farm keeps what it touches. You walk away now, you might be free. But stay past the harvest, and you'll never leave." Not truly. His words terrified me more than the voices, more than the scarecrows, more than the thing in the barn. Because I realized then that he wasn't warning me. He was telling me what had already happened to him, and what might already be happening to me. By the time August tipped toward September, my body had grown accustomed to the work, but my mind was fraying thread by thread. The rules no longer felt like protections. They were shackles, and every time I obeyed them, a part of me withered. But the farm didn't want my strength. It wanted my attention, my acknowledgement, my surrender. And the longer I stayed, the harder it became not to give it. I woke most mornings in a fog, unsure whether I had truly slept. My dreams bled into waking life, voices echoing in my skull, shadows flickering at the edges of my sight. Once, I jolted upright in bed, certain someone was sitting in the chair beside me, only to find the room empty. Yet the smell of damp straw lingered, sour and metallic, as though something had brushed past my pillow. The workers had grown stranger too. Bill, once terse but grounded, began muttering under his breath, reciting prayers or numbers in a loop. Two others, a married pair named Sarah and Luke, stopped speaking entirely, communicating only with gestures, their eyes hollow and rimmed red. It struck me then that Mr. Calloway wasn't running a farm. He was running a ward, and we were his patients, each one cracking under pressure at a different pace. I considered leaving, packing my meager belongings and walking the gravel road until I found a town, a phone, the world outside. But each time the thought formed, I felt the weight of the land pressing against it. The cornfields seemed endless, their green walls rising higher, closing in. I couldn't shake the sense that if I tried to walk through them, I'd never come out. The scarecrows proved it one afternoon. I had been sent to clear brush near the southern fence, where the pasture met the forest. Sweat soaked my shirt, and gnats clung to my face. When I paused to drink from my canteen, I noticed a scarecrow leaning against the fence post not 10 feet away. Its head hung low, hat shadowing its face. But I knew with absolute certainty it hadn't been there moments before. I dropped the canteen. My throat burned with thirst, but I didn't dare reach for it. The scarecrow's sleeve twitched, a faint shudder like a muscle spasm. Then the head lifted just slightly, revealing the pale oval of a burlap sack beneath the brim. 2 black pits had been gouged where eyes should be. I turned and ran. By the time I reached the yard, gasping, the scarecrow was gone. But that night, when I looked from my window before drawing the curtains, I saw it standing at the edge of the field, facing the house. The rules said not to look, but I couldn't help it. That same week, Bill vanished. I woke to commotion one morning, chairs scraping, voices low. His bed was empty, his belongings gone. No one said a word. When I asked what had happened, Mr. Calloway silenced me with a glare so sharp I felt it in my bones. But later, when I walked past the barn, I heard a sound from inside, a dragging shuffle, a scrape like straw against wood, and beneath it, a moan that sounded almost human. My stomach dropped. I knew then that Bill hadn't left the farm at all. I tried to hold on to reason, but reason was slipping. I spoke aloud less and less, afraid of what might answer back. My thoughts circled endlessly. Why the rules? Why us? What did the land want? Each time I approached Mr. Calloway for answers, he gave me only fragments. "It was here before us," he said once. "We'll just keep the lid on." Another time, "The land remembers hunger. All we can do is starve it slow." One evening, just after supper, he pulled me aside on the porch. The sky burned orange with sunset, the fields glowing like embers. He looked old, older than I had ever seen him, his hands trembling slightly as he lit his pipe. "You've lasted longer than most," he said. "But you're wearing thin. I can see it in your eyes." I asked him if I could leave. The words spilled out raw, desperate. He puffed smoke and stared into the corn. "You can try," he said, "but the road won't be what you think it is. The farm doesn't end where the fence ends. It ends when it lets you go." His words sank into me like stones. I wanted to scream, to curse him, to demand why he hadn't warned me before I came. But I already knew the answer. No one would come if they knew. And the farm needed us. That night, the chair rocked harder than ever before. I could hear it thundering on the porch, wood groaning as though whoever, or whatever, sat there was impatient. The voices outside my window turned shrill, a cacophony of pleading and laughter. My name slammed against the glass, again and again, until I thought it might shatter. I curled on my bed, sobbing silently, my hands clamped over my ears. I wanted to obey. God help me, I wanted to. I wanted to throw the curtains wide, to see, to know. I wanted release, even if it came with ruin. But I held. The next morning, the chair was splintered. One arm cracked, as though something had gripped it too hard. I didn't ask who had repaired it, but by evening, it stood whole again, waiting. The farm itself seemed to change as September crept closer. The fields no longer felt alive but watchful. The corn stalks, once vibrant green, dulled to gray, their tassels brittle as bone. Walking between the rows became unbearable. I felt eyes on me from every direction, and sometimes I swore I saw shapes darting just ahead, vanishing before I could focus, and the scarecrows multiplied still. I stopped counting after 50. They filled the fields like soldiers in formation. Each one turned subtly toward the house. At night, I dreamed of them marching, straw limbs creaking, burlap faces tilting skyward. The pressure built until I broke. I don't know if it was courage or madness, but one night I decided I would look. Just once. Just to see. I waited until the voices called again. They came as they always did. Familiar tones wrapped around my name, urgent, insistent. I rose, trembling, and stood before the window. My hands gripped the curtain. I whispered a prayer and pulled it back. At first, I saw only the yard bathed in moonlight. The porch chair rocked empty. The fields rippled gently. Relief surged, until I noticed the figures. Not one, not 2 dozens. Every scarecrow in the field had turned toward the house. Their heads tilted back, faces angled to my window. The breeze stirred, and in unison, their arms lifted, straw fingers reaching skyward. A sound rose then, soft at first, then swelling a rustling, whispering chorus, like thousands of dry stalks brushing together. But beneath it, I heard words. My name repeated in dozens of voices, from dozens of mouths that should not move. I staggered back, slamming the curtain shut. My body convulsed with terror, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they'd crack. I had broken the rule, and from that moment on, the farm would never let me forget it. After the night I drew the curtain and saw the scarecrows watching me, I knew something had shifted. The rules had held me like a fence, and I had stepped through the gap. Whatever fragile line kept me safe was gone. The next day, I worked as usual, hauling bales, repairing fence posts, following the rhythm of the farm. But the others wouldn't meet my eyes. Their silence was different now, not wary, not resigned. Afraid of me. They knew what I had done without asking. Perhaps the land whispered it to them, or perhaps my face betrayed it. Mr. Calloway did not speak a word at breakfast, but when dusk fell, he came to my door. His boots thudded once against the wood, then his voice followed, low and sharp. "You looked, didn't you?" I couldn't answer. The silence stretched until I thought he'd break the door down. Finally, he said, "You've got until harvest. After that, you're theirs." His steps retreated, and I sat shaking in the dark. The nights grew unbearable. The rocking chair never stopped now. It creaked from sunset to sunrise, an endless metronome of dread. The voices no longer begged or pleaded. They commanded, "Open. Come out. Answer." They spoke in unison, 1,000 tones woven into one. My name throbbed in my skull until it was no longer mine, just a sound they owned. The scarecrows moved freely by day. I would turn from a fence post and find one behind me. I would carry water to the pump and see another at the gate, head cocked as if studying me. They didn't hide their movements anymore. And when I blinked, sometimes their straw faces split, not wide, not obvious, but just enough for the burlap to stretch, as though something inside was pressing to get out. Sarah and Luke vanished first. One morning their bunks were empty, their bowls untouched at breakfast. No one asked. No one searched. But as I walked the fields later, I saw 2 new scarecrows by the south line, their clothes still clean, their shapes too human. My stomach turned, and I could not eat that night. I wondered then if that was the fate of all who broke the rules. Not taken away, but remade. Bound to the land as its sentinels. The voices grew bolder. One night, I heard them inside the house. They whispered in the hallway, soft footsteps pacing outside my door. The knob twisted. I jammed a chair against it, pressing with my shoulder as the wood rattled in its frame. The whispers seeped through the cracks, filling my room like smoke. "Andrew," they hissed, "you belong to us now." When dawn came, the knob was cold to the touch, damp as if gripped by wet hands. The chair left a deep groove in the floor where it had held. I begged Mr. Calloway to let me leave. I told him I'd run, I'd never tell a soul, I'd vanish. He shook his head, eyes heavy with pity. "It's too late," he said. "Once you look, they mark you. You're part of the bargain now." "What bargain?" I demanded. For once, I wanted the truth. He lit his pipe and stared at the horizon. "The farm stands, the land stays fed, and the rest of the world keeps turning. That's the bargain. Some of us give our lives so the hunger doesn't spread. Better here than everywhere." I wanted to call him mad. I wanted to tell him no patch of land, no field, no soil was worth such horror. But deep down, I believed him. I felt the truth of it in my bones. September ended in a haze of fear and exhaustion. Each night, the chair creaked. Each morning, the fields grew thicker with scarecrows. I stopped counting after 70. I stopped hoping for escape. My thoughts narrowed to one refrain: last until harvest. Last until harvest. But harvest did not bring freedom. The final night, the air itself felt poisoned, thick and metallic, stinging my lungs. The workers moved like shadows, their faces pale, their eyes unfocused. Supper was silent. The bowls barely touched. Even Mr. Calloway seemed diminished, his hands trembling so badly he spilled his water. He looked at me across the table and whispered, "Stay in your room tonight. Do not open the door no matter what." I wanted to demand more, but the weight in his voice silenced me. That night, the voices did not whisper. They roared. The whole house shook with them, a hurricane of sound. My name shrieked from every wall, every crack, every nail. The rocking chair thundered like a hammer striking the porch. The curtains trembled, though the windows were closed. Then came the footsteps. Dozens, hundreds, stomping across the porch, the yard, the stairs. They climbed toward me. My door rattled in its hinges, the wood splitting, the latch straining. I pressed my back against it, screaming wordless denial as the voices howled, "Open!" The door bulged inward. The wood cracked. Through the splintered gap, I saw a field of burlap faces, straw hands clawing, black pits where eyes should be, and behind them, taller shapes, wrong shapes, shimmering like heat haze, their mouths gaping with hunger. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes, hours, an eternity. I pressed until my muscles tore, until my throat was raw from screaming. The house itself seemed to groan, its beams bowing under the weight of what pressed in. And then silence. Dawn broke pale and cold. The door held, though splintered. The voices were gone. The chair was still. I staggered outside, the yard eerily calm. The scarecrows stood in the fields as before, unmoving, facing the house. But I knew they had moved in the night. I knew they had tried to take me, and I knew they would try again. Mr. Calloway found me there, my body shaking, my face streaked with tears. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You survived the harvest," he said. "That means you're bound now. The farm won't let you leave." I wanted to fight him. I wanted to run down the road and never stop. But even as I thought it, I felt the truth: the road wouldn't take me. The world beyond would twist back into these fields. So I stayed. I still stay. Years have passed since that summer. My body is older now, my hands roughened, my eyes sunken. But I remain working the land, feeding the animals, obeying the rules. New workers come each season, and I watch them with the same heavy silence the others once gave me. Some leave before the farm marks them. Some do not. I don't speak of the rules until it's too late for them to leave easily. Maybe that's cruelty. Maybe it's mercy. At night, I hear the voices still. I draw the curtains. I keep silent. I never answer. The rocking chair creaks and I do not look. But sometimes, when the moon is full and the fields shimmer like silver, I see them standing among the rows. The scarecrows, the ones who came before me, the ones who broke. Their burlap faces tilt toward me, and though their mouths cannot move, I hear them calling my name. And I know, with a certainty deeper than bone, that one day, when my strength fails and my will breaks, I will join them. I will stand in the feebled, straw-stuffed and silent, watching the house, waiting for the next fool to take a summer job on this farm in Ontario.